So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on What If Naruto Had Dirty Body and Eyes After Kushina Left City movie. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Orochimaru frowned in annoyance. When Sarutobi had allowed him to flee rather than killing him, the Sandaime may have thought he was doing his old student a favor. However, at least from the point of view of Orochimaru, being forced to abandon all of his experiments and equipment was nothing short of inconsiderate. Had Orochimaru not been setting up a lab in one of the minor villages outside of Konoha for years, he would have been seriously set back in his research after this unforeseen event. He was particularly annoyed because the timing of Sarutobi's raid meant that he had had to abandon every one of the 60 children he had commandeered, just when the vitals of that one little boy had seemed to be on the point of stabilizing. Now he might never know if his trying to reproduce to Mokuton bloodline had come to anything. Pity. Waste. That was frame of mind and state of thinking Orochimaru had reached by the time he was approached by Akatsuki. He was ready to listen to this group and its advances and propositions. Though it was difficult for him to sort out their confused and tangled web of morals and obligations, the one thing he truly understood in their offer was something he had yearned for and actively sought after for a good part of his life: power. And at what cost? No cost, the representative of this group assured him. The only thing that would be asked of him would be that he fight alongside the other members of this group and, naturally, swear allegiance to their leader. Orochimaru considered this and, as he did so, let his eyes travel over the man before him with interest. He was crouched low to the ground, his broad, slightly domed back swathed in a dark robe patterned with blood-red clouds. A wide straw hat hung with veils hid the man's face. Absently, Orochimaru wondered why the man felt the need to cover his face. After a minute, his focus returned to the man's offer. To his pleasure, Orochimaru found that his superior mind had it all neatly worked out. There was not a doubt in his mind. Power for the sake of a few flimsy promises? Was there even anything that needed consideration? And thus Orochimaru found his way into the ranks of the Akatsuki, and what he saw there changed his life. Orochimaru had always been a solitary man, his furtive habits of secrets and lies stretching even as far back as to when he had still been on a genin team. They had been little things then, but he had had a lifetime to build those habits and interests up to something a bit more sinister. And for the last couple of years, the interests had shifted to the topic of immortality. Orochimaru had tried and tested every method he had heard of to extend his lifespan, for despite everything he had done to himself, Orochimaru could never escape the looming fate of the mortal man: death. Until he made an amazing discovery. If one lives life without incident, without the corruption of cancers and diseases, if one does nothing to force an early death upon oneself, what is it that ultimately kills one? The answer, of course, is simple obsolescence. The body runs out of inertia. Organs fail, whole sectors of the brain shut down and the body begins to decompose. Now, these were not original observations for Orochimaru to make, but such was his loathing for his own ties to mortality that he became desperate to hit on the solution that would solve his problems and prevent his body from decaying and coming undone, betraying him, in fact. And finally, after years of fruitless searching, the fateful question occurred to the snake Sanin. It is, perhaps, inevitable that my own body will eventually fail. But who on earth is to stop me from turning to the bodies of others when my own is no longer up to the task? And the answer to Orochimaru's longest-standing dilemma was at last within sight. True, the technique took time to perfect, but once it was finished, it was truly an elegant jutsu. Orochimaru had only to look around him, select a suitable host, and take over, molding the features to resemble his own. A moment of vanity. Through trial and error, Orochimaru discovered two very important features of his new favorite jutsu. The first was that whatever host he selected, he was stuck with them for a minimum of 3 years. The second, and possibly more important discovery, was the fact that, when he took possession of a new skin, as he liked to think of his hosts, their natural bloodlines and abilities came into his possession for the duration of his stay inside of their bodies. Naturally, the first step from the latter discovery was to ensure that all of the hosts Orochimaru had lined up for future occupation had some bloodline or power to recommend them as to make Orochimaru's stay in their skin more valuable and more worthwhile. However, as it often is with all who crave power, simply occupying those with one existing bloodline or another became trite and less spectacular a prospect with time. So, just as naturally as the first phase, the second phase of thinking cropped up. If one can create one jutsu, one can create many, right? So if one can have one power, one may as well have more than one. The long and short of it, if Orochimaru was going to stick to inhabiting those who already possessed a bloodline when he found them, his choices were rather limited. However, if Orochimaru were to combine bloodlines, were to create rather than find a host, why, the possibilities were nigh limitless. He could build an incredible body. The perfect body. When Orochimaru was formally inducted into the organization of Akatsuki, he was immediately paired up with Sasori, the man who had been sent to recruit him. Initially, Orochimaru assumed that he had only been placed with a partner because he was new to the organization, but he soon discovered, when he finally met the other members in person shortly after his initiation, that as was customary for all of the members of Akatsuki to travel in groups of 2, unless of course their mysterious leader, a man known only as Pain, instructed them to go after a more difficult target, in which case multiple groups were dispatched. However, unusual customs aside, Akatsuki was all Orochimaru could have hoped for in an organization. Not because of its immediate goals, which seemed to consist mostly of going after high-bounty missing nin, particularly in AIM, where the Akatsuki headquarters were located, though occasionally certain groups would be forced to journey farther afield in pursuit of their quarry. Not even the long-term goals of the group interested Orochimaru, as he was never specifically told what those might be. All he knew of those matters consisted of what he had gathered from whispers and question and snatches of conversations. From these things, he was able to surmise that Akatsuki's leaders, Pain's, plans included the Jinchuriki and the 9 Biju in some way. But none of these things made Orochimaru notably excited. No, the element of Akatsuki that really piqued his interest was the members themselves. Once Orochimaru was able to have a good look at each of them in person, he wondered at his good fortune at being invited into this group. For one thing, there was his own partner, Sasori of the Red Sand, the legendary puppet master from Suna. Orochimaru had not initially recognized him when he had come to ask Orochimaru to join, but once the snake Sannin properly understood just who his partner was, he was truly impressed. Sasori's reputation preceded him, though it was some time before Orochimaru saw any more of him than just the puppet he traveled in. Another member who made an impression on Orochimaru was the yet partner less Kiri missing nin Kisame Hoshigaki, the monster of the mist, also known as the tailed beast without a tail. Kisame had become one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist when he had killed first his teammates to prevent them from leaking information under torture and then his sensei when he realized the man was corrupt. He had taken from his dead master the sword he still wielded, a sentient, scaled weapon that acted as a leech, drawing chakra from all those it touched, save for Kisame, to whom Samahada could give chakra to heal him. Orochimaru had been aimlessly exploring the corridors of the Akatsuki headquarters when he happened to encounter Kakuzu, formerly of Takigakure. The snake Sannin's heart beat faster, though Orochimaru knew it to be out of excitement rather than fear. From what Orochimaru had heard of the man with the strange eyes, Kakuzu not only had in his possession the hearts of the village leaders who had imprisoned him, but a pseudo-immortality technique to accompany them. Apparently, the man had managed to incorporate those hearts into his own body, allowing him to send them into battle in the guises of great beasts of thread and chakra. Orochimaru knew that Kakuzu could never be killed so long as even a single heart remained to him. This was an ability worth investigating. Yet another member with an ability so tantalizing that it practically made the snake Sannin start salivating when he first saw it in action was that of Hidan, Kakuzu's partner. While Kakuzu's abilities only seemed to grant him extended life, it seemed as though Hidan's powers wrought true immortality. It was said that it was Hidan's patron god, Jashin, who apparently demanded numerous bloody sacrifices every time Hidan fought, was the source of Hidan's immortality. True, it did seem slightly inconvenient that any part of Hidan that happened to be cut off during a struggle would have to be manually reattached, but to Orochimaru's mind, the prospect of not dying when, say, one's head was removed more than made up for that. There was a member of Akatsuki that Orochimaru rarely saw, and that was the organization's spy, Zetsu. Possessing a split personality, and an accordingly split appearance, Zetsu's loyalties often seemed slightly random and unfixed. These were, perhaps, the reasons that Zetsu never had a partner. The reason he made such a good spy, Sasori informed Orochimaru, was that he had the ability to merge with surfaces, mainly the ground, and instantly re-emerge from any other surface at all, allowing for fast travel and quick communication. For some time, Orochimaru had been wondering how, in an organization mainly composed of missing nin, Akatsuki managed to collect the bounties for the other missing nin they tracked down and killed on a daily basis. The answer came to him in the form of Konan, God's paper angel of AIM. Konan had the ability to infuse sheets of paper with her chakra to manipulate them as weapons, or even go so far as to transform her entire body into sheets of paper. These abilities, while interesting enough, especially from the standpoint of a scientist, paled in comparison to those of Konan's partner, Pain. The moment Orochimaru laid eyes on Pain, he could barely contain his greed. The Rinnegan. A practically unstoppable jujutsu, one to rival even the Sharingan. But, as Orochimaru quickly learned, the pain that he had thought of as the leader of Akatsuki was nothing more than a fragment of the true pain, who was, in fact, a man named Nagato, the leader of AIM. Nagato used the 6 bodies of pain in much the same way Sasori used his puppets, directing them through the metal piercings that were infused with Nagato's chakra. However, each of the bodies of pain, unmistakable with their orange hair and numerous facial piercings, was more attractive to Orochimaru than any number of puppets, as each possessed the Rinnegan. The moment Orochimaru realized that, for the first time, he was in close contact on a daily basis with so many individuals with such immense natural power, it became clear to him what he would do. The first body he would test his immortality jutsu on would be one constructed of the DNA of all of Orochimaru's fellow members of Akatsuki. With that decided, all that remained was to gather the DNA. Logically enough, Orochimaru decided to begin his enterprise of gathering DNA with Hidan. Hidan left pints of blood spattered on the ground almost every time he engaged in battle. It was no trouble at all for Orochimaru to salvage some, secretly tucking away the vials in his cloak. Kakuzu presented a bit more of a challenge, as the man had no blood to spill and kept his hair tied up and covered at all times. It was only the merest luck that Orochimaru managed to procure some of Kakuzu's DNA. He and Sasori had been joined by Hidan and Kakuzu on tracking down a pair of missing nin from Suna, the Gamamoto brothers. Sasori hung back from this fight, as the Gamamoto brothers were close-range fighters who wielded oversized, serrated kunai. Kakuzu had weakened them, calling out only 2 of his thread beasts before drawing back and allowing Orochimaru to kill the first brother. Orochimaru suspected Kakuzu had been ordered to do so, as he had not seemed wholehearted in his insistence that the snake Sannin finish off the shinobi. Of course, orders or no, Hidan demanded that he the one to kill the other brother, which he did, with much messy, drawn-out suffering. Kakuzu and Sasori, possibly regretting letting Orochimaru claim one of the kills, told the snake Sannin to seal up the bodies in a scroll so they could be brought back to AIM for the reward. This Orochimaru obligingly did. However, while he was bent over, sealing the body of the brother he himself had killed, he noticed several thick, dark, coarse threads caught in the jagged ridges of the man's weapon. Quickly and carefully, Orochimaru worked the threads free, folding them up in a square of cloth and hiding them in his cloak before sealing up the corpse and hastening after his teammates, a small smile playing around his thin mouth. Orochimaru had at first thought it would be easy to gather genetic material from pain, just run his fingers through Animal Pat's hair and he'd have his sample. But it soon occurred to Orochimaru that the pads of pain could not have originally possessed the Rinnegan before Nagato took control of them. Therefore, DNA from any of them might not be of any use at all to his plan to obtain the Rinnegan. Orochimaru thought again. It came to him that Nagato had to control his pads of pain somehow, and that perhaps that was the way to gather the genetic material he needed. Suddenly, Orochimaru remembered the piercings, the tiny spikes and bars composed of dark metal. Metal infused with Nagato's chakra. The same type of metal that all of the pads of pain could form literally with the flick of a wrist. Once he had come to this realization, it was no trouble at all for the snake Sannin to pay a little visit to the private training grounds behind the Akatsuki headquarters building just as Diva Path was leaving, its own training done for the day. Orochimaru was delighted to find that Diva Path had been practicing its aim, hurling short lengths of the chakra-infused metal he produced at the straw dummies and various targets. Pretending he was just cleaning up a little before he did some practicing himself, Orochimaru went around, pulling short lengths of metal out of the targets. He put the resulting pile of thick metal rods by the door that led back inside the compound, but not before he snagged a few pieces, pulling them inside his sleeve and slipping them in a pocket sewn into the inside of his robe. Being paranoid by nature, Orochimaru then spent the next few hours outside training, just in case anyone was watching him. Though Kisame was a formidable fighter, there was not much in the way of special bloodlines or powers that he had to offer Orochimaru. No, what the snake Sannin really wanted from the Hoshigaki was some genetic material from the large, leech-like sword, Samahata. And, in a way he could not have foreseen, just such an opportunity presented itself to Orochimaru, practically screaming to be exploited. It started when Orochimaru asked Kisame to spar with him with the vague idea that fighting the Shark Man would give him a better idea of how to acquire some DNA from Samahata. Kisame pulled a face. "Can I put off that spar? Actually, I'll make it up to you later." Kisame immediately had Orochimaru's attention at that, though the snake Sannin thought he disguised it well. "Why?" he asked, feigning disappointment. "You picked the one day to ask that Samahata is shedding," Kisame said. Orochimaru noticed that Kisame did not have the sword with him. Shedding? I didn't know he sheds, Orochimaru said, shaming disinterest as hard as he could. Yeah, it doesn't happen often, only once every couple of years. What happens? Well, a new coat of scales grows, forcing the old scales to drop off. The old scales won't absorb chakra once they fall off, but they're still full of chakra, so once all of them have fallen off and the new coat has settled, Samahata eats the old scales. How long does the whole process take? A good 12 hours, not including the 20 minutes of so it takes him to eat the old scales, Kisame said ruefully. In that case, Orochimaru sighed discontentedly, I'll let you off sparring, for now. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you once Samahata's ready, Kisame promised. Orochimaru nodded and walked away. Once he was out of sight, he headed straight to Kisami's room to gather a couple of scales, almost unable to suppress his laughter. That had been amazingly easy. When Orochimaru had first been shown the outdoor training grounds behind the Akatsuki headquarters, he had immediately noticed and commented on the tiny strip of garden down the left side of the headquarters building. He was quickly informed that Zetsu, who found it easier to merge with the ground if there were plants growing in it, tended to the flowers and grass there. Orochimaru carefully made a note of this, knowing that if he was going to get some DNA off of Zetsu, it would probably be while he was re-emerging from the ground. After nearly a month of biding his time and keeping an eye out, Orochimaru thought that he might finally have hit on a way to get some of Zetsu's DNA and get away with it. It was when he spotted Konan arranging some long-stemmed yellow flowers in a vase. Flowers Orochimaru knew he had recently spotted in Zetsu's little garden. When he questioned her, she gave a strange look before answering. Yes, they're from Zetsu's garden. He'll object as usual, but he'll deal with it. With a flourish that Orochimaru suspected was for his benefit, Konan produced several paper flowers from nowhere and slid them into the vase, mixing them in with the real ones. Orochimaru watched her, his mind whirring with thoughts of how to get his hands on even a few strands of Zetsu's DNA. It would be more than 2 weeks before he could implement his plan to achieve that end. Orochimaru left the building, intending to do a bit of target practice. However, no sooner than he set foot outside the building he caught sight of something green in the corner of his eye. He immediately adjusted his path, heading for Zetsu's garden and pulling a small pair of sample snips out of an inner pocket. He knelt down, pretending not to see the enormous, flytrap-like growth or the accusing pair of mismatched eyes staring at him from the height of the nearest flowers. Orochimaru began clip flowers, slowly moving down the bed until he was directly in front of Zetsu's head, which was the only part of the man that was poking out of the ground. Orochimaru clipped off a few strands of Zetsu's hair before he was forced to pull back his hands or risk losing them as Zetsu closed his flytrap with a loud snap. Orochimaru hastily stowed the snips away and stood, backing up a step. Zetsu's flytrap opened up again and the mismatched man glared at Orochimaru. What do you think you're doing? Orochimaru sighed theatrically, doing his best to put a bit of whine into his words. Konan's making me do her dirty work just because she still thinks of me as the new guy. She asked me to come out here and cut her some flowers. Orochimaru sulkily held out the bunch of assorted flowers in his left hand. Zetsu stared at the flowers as though they were the murdered corpses of his closest family and friends. Just don't do it again, it's not funny. Orochimaru nodded quickly. Zetsu glared at him one more time before sinking back into the ground completely. Orochimaru uncurled the hand wrapped around the stems of the flowers he had cut and delicately began picking greenish hairs out from between the stems. When he had collected all of the strands of hair and carefully tucked them away, he went back inside. He placed the flowers in one of Konan's vases just in case Zetsu thought to check up on his alibi. He stared at the slightly wilted flowers in discontent. Something was missing. Konan mixes paper flowers in with the real ones, Orochimaru realized. If I'm going to do this, I have to do it right or the others will suspect. Orochimaru hunted up the vase Konan had filled 2 weeks ago. It contained the browned and shriveled husks of those old flowers and, as if in mockery of the dead blooms, several full, perfect paper flowers. Orochimaru got rid of the dead flowers and slipped the paper creations out of the old vase and arranged them in the new one. Now that that's done, how'd I go about getting a bit of Konan's DNA? Orochimaru wondered, walking away. Without warning, he stopped cold in his tracks, quite glad that no one else was around to see him. Either I'm a gold-plated genius or a complete and total fool, Orochimaru thought, slowly turning to face his floral arrangement. I was there when Konan made those paper flowers. I don't remember her pulling out any paper to fold. The paper just appeared. Every one of those flowers contains both her DNA and her chakra. As Orochimaru rearranged the flowers to hide the gap that had been created by removing one of the paper flowers, he decided gold-plated genius. Sasori, the final member Orochimaru needed DNA from, was proving to be even more of a problem than Pain had been. For one thing, he always traveled and fought from inside one of his favorite puppets, Hiriko. Orochimaru had only seen him without his casing once in all of his time as one of Akatsuki, and that had been because Hiriko had been damaged in a fight and Sasori wanted to repair him. When the red-haired man emerged, Orochimaru had been intrigued. The man must be over 30 at least, but he had the slight frame and boyish face of one in his late teens. The round eyes that had stared at Orochimaru so defiantly, daring the snake Sannin to comment on his appearance, were set in a face of smooth, hollow curves unmarred by the passing of time. But Orochimaru, his primary affinity being that of snakes, did not have to rely entirely on his eyes to analyze his partner. He drew breath after quiet breath, letting the sensitive scent receptors in his mouth and nose take in every aspect of Sasori's scent. That smell troubled him. Sasori smelled of warm, varnished wood and sharply of much-used and well-oiled metal, but not, to Orochimaru's quiet distress, of anything that a human normally possesses that could be taken for a DNA sample. He simply did not have the smells of hair or sweat or even of saliva. The only hopeful smell Orochimaru caught under the overwhelming odor of chakra-infused iron was the faintest, rusty smell of blood, coming from the vicinity of Sasori's chest cavity as he bent over Hiriko, a delicate tool gripped expertly in his hand. So, your heart is human, no matter what the rest on you is, Sasori? Orochimaru thought. This was one problem he could attack directly. The only thing he could do was wait for an opportunity to present itself and, if need be, tweak the circumstances a bit. And, as it just so happened, the very situation materialized no more than a couple of months after Orochimaru made his novel discovery about the state of Sasori's true body. It was when Pain had directed Sasori and Orochimaru to go after Yoshiki Matsuma, high-profile missing nin hailing from Ubikure. Orochimaru thought wryly, as his sword glanced harmlessly off of Matsuma's plated bracers and he dodged a high kick, that perhaps Akatsuki's esteemed leader had underestimated this Yoshiki Matsuma. He was putting up one hell of a fight. It was at this point that Orochimaru, having dodged a rapid succession of kicks and blows, and more than one potentially fatal projectile, failed to notice the final move of the set. Matsuma's knee slammed into his chest and sent him sprawling. He was prevented from getting up as several large shuriken that had been sent spinning after him the moment he had been knocked back slammed into the rock around him, pinning him tightly by his clothes and nicking and lacerating his flesh in several places. It was all he could do to crane his neck upwards to watch how Sasori was faring. The puppet master, hidden inside Hiriko as usual, seemed to be holding his own. The scorpion-like tail of the massive puppet came whipping down to block a wild swing from Matsuma, just missing the missing nin's face by a hair's breadth. Matsuma struggled for the briefest moment before recognizing that he would be unable to gain any ground against the powerful jointed tail. Instead, he fell into a kind of crouch, disengaging his thick, heavy blade from Hiriko's tail, allowing the tail to arc of his head and slamming the wide, rounded pommel of his weapon down on the broad shell of the large puppet, using chakra to strengthen the blow. Orochimaru winced as the reinforced wood splintered and buckled, the body of the puppet completely collapsing in scant instants. What Yoshiki Matsuma could not see from his perch on top of Hiriko's shell, but what Orochimaru could see from his worm's eye vantage point was the red-haired figure released from the underbelly of the demolished puppet lightly drop to the ground and scuttle up and over the side of Hiriko's shell. Sasori was on Matsuma in an instant, one arm wrapped around Matsuma's throat and another fetching out a kunai. Matsuma, caught off guard, not wasting time trying to draw breath, simply reversed his grip on his mighty blade, plunging it back under his own arm, the tip aimed straight for Sasori's heart. Orochimaru caught sight of a flash of purple. His nostrils dilated and he caught the tantalizing scent of blood. Then he realized that Matsuma had stopped moving. It probably had something to do with the poisoned kunai protruding from the side of his neck. Sasori released his hold on Matsuma's body and let it topple off the back of his ruined puppet. Then he himself leapt down and Orochimaru was astonished to note that the red-haired man nearly stumbled upon landing. He approached Orochimaru, swaying slightly, and dropped to his knees to tug the shuriken out of the rocky earth, freeing his comrade. When he bent over Orochimaru, the snake Sannin saw a shallow gash in Sasori's chest right over the place one's heart would be in a normal human. The gash was leaking purplish liquid and the odor of fresh blood came to Orochimaru in gusts as Sasori straightened and stood up. Orochimaru pulled back his sleeves to examine the many cuts and bruises on his arms, pretending not to notice Sasori's condition. It seemed that Sasori himself had barely noticed his injury. It was only when he looked down at the purple blood dripping down his robe that he reacted, exclaiming in annoyance and trying to stem the flow. Secretly, hidden from Sasori's sight on Hiriko's other side, Orochimaru crouched down to examine the thick, heavy sword that Matsuma had wielded. The last 2 inches of the tip were soaked in the same purplish blood that Sasori was still trying to clean up. Taking a quick glance at his partner, Orochimaru fetched out a small, tattered scroll and unsealed a glass vial, into which he scraped the precious drops of Sasori's blood before stopping the vial and sealing it up again. Orochimaru, consumed of late as he had been by his ambition to collect genetic material from every one of his teammates, was startled to discover that he had already been part of Akatsuki for several years, long enough to make him feel slightly superior when Sasori mentioned to him that there would soon be new member joining their ranks. Superior, at least, until he saw who the newest member was, saw him walk in wearing his new black and red robe zipped all the way up past his chin so that the collar was just below his eyes. And what eyes? As soon as Orochimaru met those eyes of Itachi Uchiha's, he remembered that before he had joined Akatsuki he had long fantasized about recruiting one of the famous Uchiha clan to be his new host. And the reason was all in the eyes. Though Itachi treated Orochimaru to a look of dislike and mistrust every time he met his gaze, Orochimaru was unable to resist sneaking looks. Such was the allure of the Sharingan. Though Orochimaru had no use for Itachi as a new skin, he could certainly see the advantage of adding the might of the Uchiha clan Dujutsu to his repertoire. However, Orochimaru soon grew frustrated with Itachi's wariness and guarded nature. Not once was there a chance for Orochimaru to salvage so much a drop of his blood, a strand of his hair, a sample of his sweat. Finally, Orochimaru knew that the only way he was leaving Akatsuki with Itachi's DNA was if he took it by force. And so he planned to finally leave Akatsuki for good. He may not be able to ensure that the process would be neat and painless, but he could at least ensure that it would be worthwhile. Enraged, Orochimaru fell back before Itachi, who straightened up slowly, surveying the snake Sanin coolly. "Give up," Itachi intoned quietly. "You will no longer be welcomed back into Akatsuki after this attack, and I know for certain you cannot return to the place where you were born. If you continue to struggle, you will fall before my Sharingan. Give up and depart intact." Brave words, Itachi Uchiha, Orochimaru spat, drawing out a kunai inside of his robe where Itachi couldn't track the movement. "But you forget, I've got decades of experience on you. And anyway Orochimaru had been trying very hard to keep still, to not move or lean forward or, by any inflection, suggest his plan, but the time had come for action. He launched himself forward, his hand, with its modified kunai, darting out, aimed straight for Itachi's right eye. Itachi backed up, moving, weaving from left to right. Doggedly, Orochimaru followed him, his hand darting back and forth like a snake following the movement of its charmer's pipe. Itachi lashed out and caught Orochimaru in his shin with a chakra-enhanced kick. To great effect, as Orochimaru was already leaning forward, throwing his center of balance off. Orochimaru collapsed, the aches and injuries from the beginning of the fight making themselves known to him. He was back on his feet in an instant, however, roaring, "Come here and I'll cut your optic nerve right out." Once again he plunged forward and once again Itachi fell back. Orochimaru wondered why he didn't Shunshin or Kawarimi. A moment later, he had his answer. "Kamui," Itachi uttered, still backing away. To his horror, Orochimaru saw his precious kunai begin to warp and be sucked in by a rapidly expanding glassy black void. In one last-ditch effort, Orochimaru lurched forward, throwing both his and Itachi's aim off by a few inches. He had only time to feel the kunai in his hand bite deep into the skin just to the right of Itachi's eye and graze his cheekbone before he lost feeling in that hand altogether. For a timeless moment, made throbbing and staticky by pain, he stared uncomprehendingly at the stump of his arm and then at his detached hand, halfway through its fall to the cobbles. He hastily stooped and caught it, cradling it in his good hand before it could hit the ground. Shooting a bleeding Itachi a look of pure malevolence, Orochimaru Kawarimi'd away, trying not to collapse and trying not to pass out and trying not to drop that kunai, more precious than either of his hands. Orochimaru woke up lying on his back. For a moment he thought it was nighttime and that the sky above him he could tell by the freshness of the air and the inconsistent air pressure on his skin that he was still out of doors was dark until he thought to open his eyes and discovered that it was only late afternoon. This fact was only registered in the back of his mind, though, because it took a backseat to the fact that there was someone leaning over him, a potential threat. Instinctively Orochimaru kicked out, catching the stranger in the gut. While the young man bent over struggling to breathe and trying not to vomit from the ferocity of the attack, Orochimaru sat up. Finding the modified kunai still in his hand, Orochimaru made haste to stow it away and draw out a more normal one. When the young man before him finally straightened up, Orochimaru was ready, his good hand shooting out to press the kunai to the young man's throat. He stopped moving immediately, though Orochimaru could feel him swallow nervously. He stared with wide blue eyes from behind a curtain of bright blonde hair. He really was awfully young. Hands, Orochimaru rasped. Show me your hands. The young man slowly raised his hands to shoulder height, palms outward in the classic "see I'm not armed" gesture. Orochimaru's eyes flickered to the palms of hands and then back to the boy's face, slightly confused. The young man chuckled nervously, stopping when he felt the cold knife riding his Adam's apple. Yeah, people always ask about the mouths when they first see my hands on. Actually, it's a funny. Orochimaru didn't wait for the rest of the chatty boy's sentence. Withdrawing the kunai from the boy's throat, he made haste to drop it point down in the grass. While the boy's eyes automatically followed the falling knife, Orochimaru used his now free hand to shut the boy up, clapping the heel of his open palm to the young man's temple, hard. The boy's eyes rolled back and he collapsed, out cold. Orochimaru stood to leave, though not before picking up his kunai and relieving the boy of a few of his long, blonde hairs. Even in his pained and weakened state, Orochimaru was a scientist at heart and not one to pass up a chance too good to miss. Orochimaru growled in annoyance. He would have to remember to invent a special, nasty punishment for that man who thought it would be amusing to give Orochimaru-sama a female skin to reside in for the next 3 years. Not that the body looked remotely female now that Orochimaru had managed to convert it to something closer to his own style. But the point was that the woman had, in life, had no particular skills useful to a skilled shinobi. This made it all the more urgent that Orochimaru begin work crafting his perfect host. He wanted it to be ready by the time his stay in his current skin was up. So he began to take in test subjects, shinobi, of course, being his preference. In a matter of months his call for test subjects seemed to spread like wildfire, passed on by word of mouth. In no time at all, people not only began to offer themselves and others of their villages to Orochimaru specifically for testing, but others, malcontents and missing nin alike, began to cluster around Orochimaru, viewing him as a sort of demi-kage and a leader in harsh times. Orochimaru, being a clever and practical man, despite his many faults and vices, saw all of these things and turned them to his advantage, forming the village hidden in the sound, Otogakure, with himself as the leader. Not only did this move supply him with a nigh-endless influx of willing test subjects, but it gave him power, status, recognition, and an army, things that seemed, to him, sure to show those weak shinobi of Konoha just whom they had banished all those years ago. No. Orochimaru pressed his hands against the one-way glass. His slitted eyes flickered from monitor to monitor, from cot to cot. Just when he thought that an entire batch of test subjects was going to survive the first infusion, just when every last one of them had stabilized hours after the shots, suddenly their vitals were going haywire. Through the glass he could hear the disheartening noise of heart rate monitors flatlining, one after the other. It was a noise he had heard all too often in the last few months. In his anger and frustration, Orochimaru pounded his fist against the glass before mentally composing himself and retiring to his study. On his desk were 2 file reports Orochimaru had been avoiding reading for days. Slowly, he slid the first one toward him and opened it. On the inside was clipped a picture of one of Orochimaru's pet test subjects, Kimimaro Kagaya. Orochimaru flipped up the medical reports, hopeful in case they should contain good news about the sickly bone user. The news was anything but good. Orochimaru's right-hand man and top medic Kabuto, a recent addition to Orochimaru's staff, had been working to cure the young Kaguya's mysterious illness since the bone user had first arrived, but to no avail. Orochimaru slammed down the file. He did not want to read Kabuto's dismal predictions that the boy's condition may worsen with time, completely deteriorating by the time he reaches the age of 15. Orochimaru turned to the other file on his desk, sliding it toward him and flipping it open. Inside was a picture of the scowling face of Jugo, a tall, orange-haired boy who had arrived in Otogakure along with Kimimaro. Though his violent and unstable split personality rendered him unsuitable for possession, his talents and abilities were utterly desirable to Orochimaru. He had adopted the task of extracting the enzymes that caused Jugo's physical transformations as a side project to take his mind off of the long, depressing months of failing to have a single subject survive one of the DNA infusions. Orochimaru secretly hoped one day to be able to transfer Jugo's powers to all of his soldiers, minus the deranged personality, of course. Orochimaru flipped Jugo's file closed and pushed it away from him, settling down in his chair. Little though he wanted to, His forced himself to think on the day's experiments. Another batch dead. Oh, why are all of my shinobi so weak? Why is everyone always failing me? I need to come up with a solution to this, and soon. Orochimaru rubbed the heels of his hands into his eyes. Finally, after several minutes of sitting in silence, he called in Kabuto. When the silver-haired, bespectacled boy entered the room, he hastily dropped down on one knee in the style of the old legionaries. Orochimaru swiveled his chair so it faced the door and Kabuto. "Stand up, Kabuto," Orochimaru said. Kabuto hastened to do as he bid. "Good boy, Kabuto," Orochimaru thought grudgingly. "Got a good mind for medical jutsu and a keen interest in the scientific side of everything. Reminds me of me, a bit. Still, if he has no good news, this confrontation may not be very good for his health. What do you have to tell me, Kabuto?" Orochimaru asked. Kabuto, perhaps hearing the note of warning in Orochimaru's voice, avoided his slitted gaze. "I have nothing new to report, Orochimaru-sama," he mumbled. "You see, Kabuto, I've been working on this project for months, trying to create the perfect host. You should know. You've been on and off that project for as long as you've worked for me." "Yes, I am aware, Orochimaru-sama." Kabuto pushed up his glasses to disguise how his hands were trembling. "Well, you would have thought, wouldn't you, that by now we'd be seeing some results. But no," Orochimaru brought his hand down on a pile of file folders in a tray on his desk. "Every single one of my test subjects thus far has died, Kabuto. I am running out of time and patience. You'd better start making suggestions fast, or I may just begin to take a serious look at you with your regeneration techniques." Kabuto's eyes widened for the briefest of moments behind his glasses. He attempted to speak but only a harsh croak escaped his lips. He had to lick the sweat from his lip and clear his throat. Despite these measures, his voice was shaky with terror. Orochimaru approved. "As it so happens, Orochimaru-sama, I believe I may have a possible solution to your problem." Orochimaru leaned forward, instantly riveted. "Choose your words very carefully, Kabuto, as they could either save or condemn you." Kabuto acknowledged this. "Hi, Orochimaru-sama. It has come to me that, as your problem is that you cannot find one with a body strong enough or perhaps DNA stable enough to accommodate additions to their genetic code, what you really need is someone with a power that will literally not allow them to die." "What you say sounds promising," Orochimaru admitted, "but I hope for your sake that you have something a bit more specific in mind, something more than pure postulation." "I do, Orochimaru-sama. What I have for you is a name." Kabuto pushed up his glasses once more and the light on the desk behind Orochimaru danced on the round lenses, causing them to turn briefly opaque, momentarily occluding Kabuto's eyes. "The name I have is Naruto Uzumaki." Orochimaru sat bolt upright in his chair, hands clutching the arms hard, nails biting into the wood as if they were hooked talons. "The Nine Tails Jinchuriki." Naruto sat on the swing seat, legs dangling and head hanging. "Hey, it's not so bad. You started going to the academy when you were 2 years younger than everyone else, so it's no wonder they all have chakra control 2 years ahead of yours. You can always try again next year." Naruto twisted the swing around until the tightly wound ropes cut and burned his arms. Then he let go, whirling around for a few seconds before he put his feet down, scuffing, dragging his sandals on the hard, packed dirt under the tree, throwing up clouds of dust. "But I don't want to have to do a whole other year of classes to become a shinobi." There was a throat-clearing noise behind him. Naruto jumped and twisted around in the seat, nearly slipping backwards off of the swing. In the large, dappled shade that the tree above was casting stood Mizuki-sensei, and he had a proposition for Naruto. The 10-year-old boy didn't quite understand what Mizuki meant by these tests he was being considered for, but he did understand that Mizuki was offering him specialized, one-on-one training with a group located outside of Konoha, such as the type that would make him a powerful shinobi in no time. "Are you willing to try it, Naruto?" Mizuki asked, a smile twisting his cruel mouth. Naruto nodded vehemently. "Then come with me at once so I can prepare you for your journey." "Don't worry about Hokage-sama," Mizuki said as Naruto opened his mouth to comment on the abruptness of the decision. "I will inform him of where you have gone. Who knows, when you come back in a few years, you may find that Hokage-sama recognizes you to be strong enough to make Chunin. After these tests, there will be no question whatsoever that you are ready to make Genin at the very least." Well, what could Naruto do? Mizuki had said the magic words. Naruto hopped down from the swing and followed Mizuki some distance, soon leaving the familiar, looming shape of the Shinobi Academy behind and traveling through the heart of the market district. Before too long they were out in the outskirts of the village, where broken glass and stray papers littered the ground and the buildings were of the narrow, crowded, choked-looking brick variety that Naruto found rather displeasing, as it reminded him a bit of the district where his own apartment was located, all grimy windows and broken streetlights. Naruto vaguely wondered why they had to walk so far, but his queries were mostly eclipsed by the unexpected turn his life had just made, and sheer excitement kept bursting through his creeping doubts. Mizuki had turned down a broad, deserted side street and Naruto stepped up behind him, rounding the corner to find that Mizuki had turned to face the mouth of the side street and with it, Naruto, who wasted no time approaching his sensei. Mizuki crouched down, placing his eye level slightly below Naruto's though he avoided looking the blonde-haired boy in the eye, one hand taking hold of Naruto's forearm and the other fumbling for something in his pocket, still smiling, always smiling, so coldly, so insincerely. Now hold still, Naruto, Mizuki said, pulling back Naruto's sleeve and, before the boy could protest, expertly injecting him with a thin, clear liquid. Naruto stared in horror at Mizuki and at himself. All his life, he had constantly been taught and retaught not to trust anyone. He should have listened to his doubts. And now he was going to die of some terrible poison at the hands of his sensei. Naruto swayed, eyes unfocused, and collapsed. Mizuki scooped up the unconscious boy and stood waiting until he saw a shadow flicker down at the end of the street. He strode over to meet the robed, bespectacled figure. Well done, Mizuki. Orochimaru-sama will be most pleased with your work. Thank you, Kabuto-san, Mizuki said, handing the sleeping child over. What are my new orders? Remain here, under cover, until you next receive instruction, Kabuto said, adjusting Naruto's limp form on his shoulder and concealing him in a fold of his cloak. He gave Mizuki a brief nod and left, taking Naruto with him. Naruto awoke slowly, groggy and confused. The bed he was lying on was too hard and the light shining in his face too bright. Naruto sat up and slid off of the high table, blinking the dazzle out of his smarting eyes and looking around him. Young though he was, Naruto could recognize a hospital room when he saw one, and this room, with its harsh lighting, operating table, and scrubbed tiling seemed like a bizarre mixture of hospital and autopsy lab, both of which Naruto had previously had the displeasure to experience in his short life within the confines of the walls of Konan. There was a large sheet of dark mirror set into one wall, no doubt a one-way window for observing what was happening in this room from the safety and relative comfort of an adjoining room, like the ones they used in the torture and interrogation department. Naruto went over to that mirror and tapped on it, reasoning that he wouldn't be in a room with a one-way mirror if no one were watching him. Hello? He called tentatively. In the next room, Orochimaru watched as his new host sat up and looked around. Take a look, Kabuto. This is the start of your newest full-time project. He clapped Kabuto on the shoulder. Congratulations. Kabuto noticed that the snake Sanin seemed in unusually good spirits. Kabuto dubiously watched the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy as he looked around the Spartan room. From what I've been told, the boy is practically illiterate, he said. Well, if your plan of depending on the Kyuubi to keep young Naruto alive comes to nothing, it won't matter. Why don't you go and prepare him for his first infusion? Kabuto was startled. So soon, Orochimaru-sama? Orochimaru shrugged, smiling playfully as he watched Naruto approach the tinted one-way mirror. If he doesn't survive the first operation, there's no need to train him, Orochimaru pointed out. If he does survive it, then you may begin to bring him up to speed. Teach him to read first, I think. That will make your job easier in the future. Kabuto strode to the exit of the room but did not open the door yet. His hand resting on the doorknob, he turned back to look at Orochimaru. The boy will undoubtedly have questions. What do I tell him? Anything you want. Just do not tell him my eventual plans for him or what exactly the experiments we will be performing on him consist of. Kabuto nodded and turned to the door, but stopped as Orochimaru spoke one last time. Oh, and Kabuto, don't tell him about the Kyuubi. We'll have to let him know eventually, but all in good time. Of course, Orochimaru-sama. Kabuto left, shutting the door behind him with a quiet, respectful click. Orochimaru shifted his gaze back to the window, a smile manifesting on his pale face when Naruto jumped as the door to the operation room was unlocked and pushed open. Naruto started around as there was the loud click of a lock turning over, and the door was pushed inwards. A boy entered. He was tall and looked to be around 15, old, from Naruto's perspective, but nowhere near as old as Gigi. He wore his mid-length silver hair tied back and round glasses perched on his nose. When he spotted Naruto standing by the mirror, he smiled. Naruto wasn't entirely sure he liked that smile. Who are you? Naruto asked accusatorially. Where am I? What happened to Mizuki? I am Kabuto Yakushi, and this one of the labs of my master. Mizuki works for the same man as I do and remained in Konoha while we brought you here. Why did you take me here? Naruto asked, backing up as Kabuto tried to approach him. You agreed to perform a couple of tests for us in exchange for us training you to be a great shinobi, Kabuto explained. What kind of tests? Naruto asked suspiciously. However, at the mention of the tests that Mizuki had spoken of, he took a step forward in spite of himself. Encouraged, Kabuto leaned against the edge of the operating table on which Naruto had awoken and patted the surface, inviting Naruto to sit up on it. Naruto did so, perching himself on the edge as far away from Kabuto as he could get. These tests are nothing special, maybe a few new vitamin supplements every couple of months, Kabuto said casually. Probably nothing immediately noticeable will happen, but it can't hurt. Why me? Naruto asked. Kabuto was growing weary of the incessant questions, but he kept the smile grafted onto his smooth, pale face so as not to alert the boy. We're interested in you. You have incredible chakra reserves and your healing rate gives you great potential as a shinobi. We only recently discovered you through Mizuki and we want to see you trained right. For the first time, Naruto stopped focusing entirely on being wary and began expending a bit of his mind to taking interest in what was happening to him. What will you teach me? Kabuto waved a finger at Naruto. Not yet. That would be telling. And you just got here. There are some preliminary tests we'd like to perform on you before I begin to teach you anything. Nothing of the pass or fail variety. I just want to know a bit more about your current skills and limitations before I begin. Kabuto pulled a vial out of his pocket and a small glass out of another. He quickly decanted the liquid from the vial into the glass and handed it to Naruto. Please drink this. Naruto sniffed the drink suspiciously, but was unable to detect any but a slight, oily, waxy scent. It didn't smell like anything dangerous that Naruto had ever drunk before, so he downed it in one swallow. Kabuto quickly slid the glass out of Naruto's slack fingers and laid him face up on the operating table so he wouldn't topple off from his perch on the edge. He ignored the accusing look on Naruto's face as the boy once again fell unconscious. The door opened and Orochimaru entered, stepping to Kabuto's side and looking down into Naruto's sleeping face. Well done. Prepare the first infusion and we'll give it to him immediately. Kabuto walked over to one of the counters along the wall and took out a key. Unlocking a wall-mounted cabinet, he swung open the door to reveal racks of samples and experimental infusions that did not require refrigeration. The more unstable solutions would not have been kept in the room where a valuable test subject was left to resurface from a drugged sleep. Kabuto reached up, gloved fingers hovering before the racks of vials. Which one, Orochimaru-sama? Orochimaru hesitated for no more than a heartbeat. Konan's DNA first, I think. He can't do much harm with it, and if his body can't handle turning from flesh to paper and back, you'll soon see and know if we ought to scrap this project and start over with someone new. Orochimaru gave Kabuto a meaningful look. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. Kabuto's fingers closed around a slim, glass vial and lifted it out of the rack, swinging the cabinet door to and locking it before returning to Orochimaru with the vial. Earlier he had, through methodical trial and error using normal paper, come upon a way to convert paper into a liquid form that it was possible to inoculate one with. Kabuto handed the vial to Orochimaru and, while Kabuto hooked Naruto up to various apparatuses that would monitor Naruto's heart rate, brain patterns, breathing rate, chakra levels, and the like, Orochimaru loaded the solution into a hypodermic needle. When Naruto was all set up, Kabuto had even gone so far as to strap him to the table. Orochimaru approached the boy, holding the needle. He injected the infusion directly into the main ulnar artery in Naruto's right arm. No sooner than he had removed the needle, the chamber empty, the prick mark closed up before a single drop of blood could spill, healing without so much as a lingering scar. That Yuki is useful stuff, Orochimaru mused, stepping away from the table. Too bad I shall probably have to extract the Kyuubi from the boy before I can claim possession of his skin. He disposed of the used needle and gave Kabuto strict instructions to watch Naruto, to keep him sedated until his vitals had returned to normal, and, if he was still alive at that point, to then move him to the room that had been prepared for him. If and when he woke naturally in the new room, he was to be fed. At that point, Kabuto was to use his judgment about when to begin Naruto's lessons, though he was not to begin teaching Naruto to use the powers that his new DNA would hopefully grant him. Those lessons would begin only with Orochimaru's express orders. Kabuto sat by Naruto for most of the next few days, watching the various monitors and, every so often, injecting another dose of sedative, spacing the doses so that the Kyuubi never had enough time to burn off the last batch before the newest amount was injected. At first, Naruto's vitals had all but shut down, His breathing had slowed until the rise and fall of his chest was barely visible, and his heart rate had slowed so much that Kabuto was constantly on tenterhooks as to whether the next tiny rise in the flat line on the monitor would ever come. His brain activity had become erratic as well. Sometimes there would be hours of nothing but the normal, automatic commands and signals, telling the heart to pump and the lungs to breathe and the like, but not much else, save for an occasional dream spike. At other times, there would be endless minutes of feverish activity, flurries of spikes and blips in the monitors, though for the most part he was quiet. After the first 2 or 3 days, however, Naruto became constantly restless. He would mumble long streams of nonsense syllables and his breath would come harder until he was gasping and panting, and Kabuto could see his eyelids twitching in REM sleep. During those times, his brain activity was that of one who is alert, albeit of one who has been awake for far too long on nowhere near enough sleep and is being asked to perform strenuous mental calisthenics. At long last, after nearly 6 days, Naruto settled down. From the monitors and Naruto's still form, from the steady rising and falling of his chest, Kabuto deduced that the storm had finally passed and it was time to wake up the subject. He unhooked all of the monitors, carefully shutting them off as he did so. He then picked up Naruto's limp form and carried him out of the room and into a nearby room that had specially prepared for him. Kabuto then retired, closing the door behind him quietly so as not wake up the blonde boy, who had passed smoothly from drug-induced unconsciousness to true sleep as seamlessly as one normally does from standing to sitting. Kabuto retreated the room adjacent to Naruto's, to which the former was connected via a one-way mirrored window so that Kabuto would see the moment when Naruto woke up, and perhaps get some rest until then. Naruto awoke and sat up immediately. He felt very slightly achy all over, but the feeling soon dissipated and he forgot the unusual sensation entirely. He took a look around the room he was in. There was one door, which was, when Naruto tried it, locked. On the wall opposite the door was another blank expanse of tinted, mirrored glass. The low bunk that he had woken up in was pushed against the wall located to the right of the one with the mirror on it. All in all, the room was about the size of his old apartment back in Konoha, with a dirty, tiled floor. "I know the drill," Naruto muttered to himself as he walked up to the tinted mirror. "Hey," he said, pounding on the window, "let me out, everyone in here is dead." Naruto listened attentively, smiling in appreciation when he heard first one crash, muffled as it was by walls and distance, and then another as the door to the room burst open and Kabuto appeared, kunai in hand, ready for trouble. "What was that?" he asked tightly. Naruto could see that the older boy was a bit short on sleep and patience. Naruto chuckled. He had once yelled the same thing as he just had when he had the misfortune to be locked in the boys' bathroom back in the academy. They had gotten him out quickly enough, but he had had to endure a lecture right after by one of his least favorite senseis. "Do you have anything to eat?" he asked. Kabuto stowed the kunai in a holster and stood, smoothing back his hair with one hand, collecting his thoughts. "Yes, of course," he said after a moment. He left the room, returning a minute later with a tray bearing a bowl of broth, a small loaf of bread, a couple of apples and a glass and pitcher of water. Naruto fell on the food, practically inhaling it before Kabuto's bemused eyes. "What now?" he asked, placing an apple core in the empty bowl. "Now you sit down and tell me how you feel," Kabuto said seriously. Naruto thought it was a strange request. After all, he didn't remember anything between when he fell asleep in that other room and awoke in this one, but answered impatiently, without sitting down, "I'm fine. Can we start training?" Kabuto raised an eyebrow at Naruto's eagerness. "If you feel up to it, fine. Come with me." Naruto obediently followed as Kabuto led him out into the hallway and through the rambling passages until he stopped before a door, unremarkable in its similarity to all the others they had passed on the way. Kabuto unlocked the door and ushered Naruto through before quickly following and locking the door securely behind him. It seemed that Kabuto was an avid locker of things. Naruto looked around at the shelves upon shelves rising up to the ceiling all around him, each one packed to overflowing with scrolls and books. "I don't get it. You're going to train me in a library?" Naruto had never had much use for libraries and was disappointed in Kabuto's choice of venue. "In a manner of speaking. Sit down, Naruto," Kabuto said, sliding into a low chair situated beside the nearest table. Reluctantly, Naruto joined him, sprawling in the seat and giving Kabuto his best sarcastic stare. Kabuto, pretending not to see, pulled forward a couple of books that had been neatly stacked on the corner of the table. "What, you're going to teach me to read or something?" Naruto asked disgustedly. "Yes. It's all part of the intensive training program you're on. You have to start at the beginning and learn the basics first, before we teach you the advanced jutsu. This isn't the academy, where they constantly push gifted students ahead before they have time to get a proper grounding in everything one is supposed to learn in the academy about being a shinobi, Kabuto said sternly. Don't waste your time, Naruto said scornfully, I already know how to read. Oh yes? Kabuto said, in a voice that was just not a snap, his patience wearing thin. Read this for me. Kabuto slid a book, a medical textbook, out from the pile, thumbed through until he reached a page that had been marked with a narrow strip of paper, and pushed it across the table at Naruto. Naruto stared down at the incomprehensible wording and language, at the footnotes and variables and Latin phrases. After a few minutes, he glanced up at Kabuto, who was watching him closely with an expression that showed that he didn't know whether to be smug or sympathetic. Well? Kabuto prompted him. Can you read it? I did read it, Naruto said on a sudden flash of inspiration. What? I read it in my head. Naruto didn't even see Kabuto move, but the next moment, his right arm was being twisted up behind his back excruciatingly and he was leaning forward, his nose almost touching the tabletop to try and take some of the agonizing pressure off of his arm, the muscles of which were screaming for release. Do not lie to me, Kabuto said in a low voice. I am trying to give you the kind of basic training you should have gotten years ago, but I cannot help you if you do not cooperate with me. Kabuto released Naruto, who sat back and flexed his arm, already feeling the viciously strained and torn muscles flex and reattach, though they would still ache for another quarter of an hour at least. Kabuto, already seated once again in his chair on the other side of the table, turned to a few pages before the one that had been bookmarked so that the book was open at the beginning of a chapter. Do attend, Kabuto said, slightly mockingly, in Naruto's opinion. The blonde-haired boy glowered. If you allow me to teach you the basics, like reading and chakra control, early on, it paves the way for me to teach you more advanced jutsu and techniques later on. Maybe not even that much later on if you just pay attention now. Do I really have a choice here? Naruto asked, rubbing his upper arm. Not really, although your attitude and compliance will dictate how much, if any, pressure I exert on you in order to gain your cooperation. Naruto's blue eyes flicked back and forth between Kabuto's black eyes, unsure what to make of the older boy. There was a gleam in Kabuto's eyes and the merest suggestion of a smile around the serious mouth, signs that Naruto's common sense told him he should not test, as they were those of a mind that would come unhinged if presented with the wrong set of answers and should, therefore, be obeyed, at least for the time being. Naruto gave a long, reluctant sigh. All right then. If it means I can learn new jutsu sooner, let's just get this over with. So Kabuto began to teach Naruto, letting him practice reading the medical journals and textbooks. Naruto's recognition and inference skills increased at a truly startling pace, and it was no more than a week before Kabuto was almost forced to ask why Naruto had barely been able to read before if he naturally learned so incredibly swiftly. Naruto rubbed the back of his head uncomfortably. It's hard to learn fast when the teacher has a class of more than 30 kids and you're the youngest one. My senseis couldn't slow it down for me to let me catch up or teach me one-on-one, he said, considering. Nonsense. You're a natural. It's not possible that that's the only reason, unless it is some effect of the Kyuubi objecting to us tampering with Naruto's DNA. Or maybe it's simply that I'm an even better teacher than Orochimaru-sama thought I was. Well, I guess being forced to leave the classroom and sit out in the hallway at least 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes for hours at a time, may not have helped, Naruto admitted, oblivious to Kabuto's private conjectures. Kabuto pushed his round glasses up on his nose, giving Naruto a smile that actually held a modicum of genuine pleasure, for a wonder. Your progress is advancing at a sufficient pace, meaning that it's time I began training you to control your chakra a bit better, though, hopefully, his chakra control will improve once we give him the puppet user's DNA, meaning I won't have to rely on him grasping this on his own. From what I was told, his chakra control is almost as abysmal as his literacy was, though, unlike reading, this most likely won't be a thing he'll be able to just pick up naturally without working at it. Naruto's eyes were crossed from staring at the leaf that rested on his forehead. Kabuto sighed in exasperation. Don't you know how to channel chakra to different parts of your body? Kabuto asked. Naruto shook his head, momentarily forgetting the leaf and quickly catching it before it could flutter to the floor. Cut me some slack. I'm just a kid, Naruto said, a slight edge to his voice. He did not like it when Kabuto made it sound like Naruto should have been born knowing things that he had never been taught, as if Naruto were somehow inferior or substandard. Kabuto opened his mouth to reply, but paused, realizing he had been about to start a sentence with, "When I was your age," which would not have been received well. Instead, he said, "I cannot cut you any slack. To do so would be to belittle your prospects as a shinobi. No, to do so would be to cut me a little slack and actually teach and show me instead of just lecturing." It would be more use, Naruto countered, tilting his head back once more to balance the leaf on his forehead. Naruto actually made a fair point, though Kabuto would never admit it, and so the silver-haired boy resigned himself to explaining the basics of chakra systems and flow patterns, tenketsu, and how to channel chakra without using a hand seal to mold it. It took a good hour or so to give Naruto a basic sketch of everything he wanted to know, even though the boy seemed only to have to hear a thing once in order to commit it to memory. The entire time that Kabuto spoke, Naruto stared at the leaf between his eyes. He was actually trying to follow the instructions that Kabuto gave him as the silver-haired boy gave them to him, trying to guess the next step before Kabuto could outline it in his quiet, precise voice. When he had, for the most part, finished speaking, Kabuto leaned against the wall, watching Naruto struggle and making comments and suggestions, which he thought of as helpful rather than irritating. Meanwhile, Naruto was definitely starting to develop a headache, what with trying to focus his chakra through a point on his face that he couldn't even see and keeping his head tipped back, and staring at something right between his eyes, and trying to recall how Kabuto had said to do it, and trying to simultaneously heed Kabuto's comments and block out their more distracting and downright irritating aspects. Finally, Kabuto left, telling Naruto to knock on the door, which was, of course, locked from the outside, when he was finished for the day. Naruto let his aching neck relax as his head fell forward. He didn't even bother catching the leaf as it spiraled to the tiled floor. I know it can be done, and I know that I won't be taken any farther until I master this, so I'll just have to keep practicing. Maybe I'm concentrating too much on focusing the chakra. Maybe Kabuto's skipping a step without realizing it. Maybe I have to be able to channel a lot of chakra before I can work it down to something smaller that I can control. In which case, why'd I have to start with my head? Naruto sat down, leaning his stiff back against the wall as he crossed his legs. The smooth wall seemed to be doing his neck and back some good, as he barely felt the soreness at all now, and his headache was almost gone. Naruto cupped his hands together, supporting the right one in his left and resting them in his lap, holding the leaf. Naruto closed his eyes and anxiously searched himself all over for his core, for the center of his chakra system, the chakra coils, as Kabuto had explained to him. He found them, a sort of pulsing of energy, not unlike a heartbeat, around the vicinity of his navel. And, again like a heartbeat or pulse, he could almost trace its path by the pressure and energy it brought throughout his body. However, the sensation was so faint that he couldn't be more than half sure that the pathways were really there at all, that he wasn't projecting upon himself sensations that he hoped and expected to feel. Oh, what the hell, it's worth a shot, he thought. Carefully, he imagined drawing the energy from his core, forcing it through a network of paths no wider than threads until it pooled in the palm of his right hand. A slight smile flickered across Naruto's face as he noticed the leaf flutter and lift slightly, as though it was sitting on top of a puddle of water. Sitting there long enough to get the technique to work had not taken very long by anyone's standards, but Naruto was renowned for his hyperactivity, and while some if it was an act, a front, and just a bit of it had been ironed out of him already during his brief stay in Orochimaru's hospitalities, Naruto still preferred moving to sitting still, and got up to pace, wishing that he was already proficient enough to practice leaf floating as he moved. A few days later, the leaf once again perched on his forehead. Naruto screwed up his eyes. A strong gust of chakra, so saturated that Naruto could practically smell it, lifted the leaf a good 5 inches into the air and held it there for a split second, before it tumbled, flipping end over end until it slid to rest on the smooth tiles. Kabuto surveyed Naruto critically. "You're wasting far too much chakra," he commented, uncrossing his arms and stepping forward from where he leaned against the wall in order to pick up the fallen leaf. "Your chakra is spraying out in all directions. The whole point of chakra control is to focus that energy into a single point and direct in that way." Thus, Kabuto stripped off one of his gloves, laying the leaf on the exposed palm and, in a moment, sending the leaf spinning toward the ceiling. As it fell, Kabuto caught it, having had time to pull his glove back on, and offered the leaf to Naruto with a courtly bow. Naruto resisted the urge to break the silver-haired boy's glasses. It was another week before Naruto could float the leaf above his head at a constant height of 3 inches for minutes on end. In the process of learning to do that, he had also learned to float the same leaf above each of his hands, though it took him a few seconds longer to get the leaf aloft above his left hand than it did his right. He was starting to hate that leaf, seriously and personally. While he was struggling with that, Kabuto began to train him physically as well and assigning Naruto passages to read each night. Naruto would normally have been of the opinion that the workload was worse than that of the academy, but to his mild surprise, he found that he was quite enjoying all of it. Even the reading material was interesting, though he still had to refer to the lexicon that Kabuto had supplied him with, so that the reading assignments took longer than usual, as Naruto was actually trying to piece together the words and understand them. Some of them were myths and stories about the Biju and some were scientific and medical journals. Some spoke of chakra theory in such a way that Naruto no longer wondered why Kabuto had been so condescending when he had discovered how poor Naruto's chakra control was. Naruto resolved to begin improving fast enough to make Kabuto seriously worried about his own status as a proficient chakra user. The physical part of Naruto's training was even more interesting, consisting of everything from flexibility to brute strength, from aiming projectiles to strategy. Here, when Kabuto found that Naruto had more or less perfected leaf floating, he began to introduce chakra to the physical training. Almost the first thing on his list to teach to Naruto was to stick to surfaces using chakra. At first, he went about it the traditional way, showing Naruto how to channel chakra through his feet in his ninja sandals, and then how to adhere that chakra to vertical surfaces, creating a bond that could support weight. Naruto wasn't very good at waiting for his chakra to bond firmly, and consequently would often try to put weight on a foot that was barely stuck onto the wall at all, resulting in a lot of flailing and quality time with the floor. Kabuto, impatient with these results, devised a new way of doing things. Climb! Kabuto yelled, loosing a hail of shuriken. Naruto scrambled up as fast as he could, zigzagging up the vertical surface as though it was nothing more than a flat parquet floor. The first few times Kabuto had done this, Naruto had gotten pierced quite a lot, mostly in the back, as he struggled to make his chakra bond, but he had soon gotten better both at dodging and sticking. As he raced across the ceiling, he reflected dryly that the least Kabuto could have done would be to give Naruto a kunai or shuriken to deflect the projectiles. No sooner than Naruto had developed a rough grasp of sticking to surfaces, than Kabuto began showing Naruto how to enhance his muscles with chakra, prolonging how long Naruto could run or fight or how far he could jump. Naruto, though this was a bit sadistic and underhanded, as it gave Kabuto an excuse to train Naruto for hours on end each day, insisting that Naruto perform complicated maneuvers and exercises daily, building up strength and chakra reserves alike and only allowing him one day off a week for pure study without any physical enterprises. Naruto would spar with Kabuto, taking to the walls and ceiling to avoid the older boy's wild attacks and projectiles. When they were locked in those brief flurries of close combat, not once did Naruto emerge victorious. Always he was distracted by Kabuto's illusory clones or by Kabuto's use of chakra scalpels or the kind of ninja tools that Naruto was never supplied with. It wasn't long before Kabuto began talking about teaching Naruto how to make clones of his own or to henge, or even to kawarimi, things, as the silver-haired boy pointed out, that any academy graduate could do. But before I start you on any of those jutsu, I have something else in mind, Kabuto said. Naruto looked up from the book in his lap, legs out straight on his bed, it being his day off. What do you want, Kabuto? Naruto asked. He had quickly discovered that it did no good to be polite to Kabuto, as the older boy did not seem to care one way or the other if Naruto was rude. In fact, from time to time Naruto got the impression that the older boy liked being stood up to like to challenge. Not at the moment, though, it seemed. I have a visitor for you. She's going to be training you in a very specific form of jutsu, but before you meet her, I need you to come with me. You're due for another test. Naruto raised an eyebrow, not stirring an inch. He could recognize the bribe. Cooperate and take the test and not only learn a new jutsu, learn it from someone other than Kabuto. Test? He asked innocently. Remember that you are only here to be trained on the condition that you take these tests for us, Naruto, Kabuto said pleasantly, though with an undertone that suggested trouble if Naruto was to try and pretend otherwise. Naruto sighed, dropping the book onto the mattress, which creaked as he swung himself off, ready to follow Kabuto. Kabuto waited until Naruto was out in the hallway before joining him and locking the door behind. Naruto followed Kabuto back to the room where he had first woken up, the room with the shiny, metal table. By now, Naruto knew enough about rudimentary medicine to recognize it as an operating room, a surprisingly under-equipped one, too, unless all of the necessary tools and materials were securely shut away behind the cabinet doors or locked in the drawers. As a result, he was even more wary than the first time this had happened when Kabuto handed him a glass and told him to drink. He couldn't remember drinking anything like it before the result of a mild anesthetic mixed in, though he wasn't to know that but he had an inkling from the substance's scent that this didn't bode well. However, Naruto, foolish though it was, trusted Kabuto not to poison him after all the training the older boy had put his way, though he did find his blue eyes straying to the tinted mirror set into the wall. He looked away with a shiver of misplaced memories and half-recollections. Hadn't this happened before? If so, why didn't he remember more clearly? His head swam. Drink it, Naruto, Kabuto insisted, and Naruto, against his better judgment, did as he was told. Kabuto once again rescued the glass before it could smash and scoop Naruto up, laying him out on the table and securely strapping him down before busying himself hooking the supine boy up to the various monitors and meters. Kabuto paused for the briefest moment in his preparations, gloved fingers light and tense on the boy's wrist, listening, giving the smallest of satisfied smiles when he heard the door behind him swing open, when he saw a pale blur of a man reflected in the tinted mirror on the wall directly in front of him. Schooling his expression, Kabuto once again returned to the task of preparing the boy as Orochimaru came up beside him and looked down into the face of the sleeping boy. I have read your reports and projections, Kabuto, and must say that the first month of this project has been progressing admirably under your command. Thank you, Orochimaru-sama. Which one this time? Orochimaru drew a small vial of watery purple liquid from his pocket. Clearly the sample had been treated and diluted since Kabuto had last seen it. For a moment, Orochimaru held up the vial, eyes flickering between it and the sleeping face of the boy. Finally, he handed the vial to Kabuto. Start training him to manipulate puppets, but do not tell him what kind of puppets he's working up to. Keep him reading medical texts, if you can. It will be very useful if he can create a puppet before I can possess him, as his chakra will then already be familiar with it and his muscles adapted to puppet work. But no human puppets too soon. We don't want to break his spirit this early. That would lead to complications. Seated, he left. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto muttered, as the door swung closed. He proceeded to seated, priming the needle. I told Orochimaru-sama that this blood would most likely improve the boy's chakra control, which is still painful to consider, but I'm not entirely sure that will be the case. Of course there may also be some mental ramifications, but mostly I suspect that Orochimaru-sama just skipped to the part of my report that talked about the boy's puppet abilities. The deed at hand completed, Kabuto sat down to monitor Naruto's vitals, mostly focusing on the brain patterns and chakra levels. Meanwhile, assuming this transfusion will be as much of a success as the last one, the boy will have two powers that he's not being told about. Dangerous. At least you won't have to wonder about this one, since I'll be teaching him to manipulate puppets at first. Perhaps it would be beneficial to have him build the wooden puppets he'll be practicing with. Then he'll have something to practice sealing on, too. Kabuto believed in killing two birds with one jutsu. When Naruto came to, he was once again in his bed and, once again, ravenously hungry. He made to get out of bed, but his knees seemed like they had forgotten which way they were supposed to bend. How long was I out? Naruto wondered. It wasn't too long before he was able to totter to the window, tapping on the mirrored glass. Kabuto answered the unceremonious summons, bringing with him a welcome change of clothing and an even more welcome tray of food. Naruto attacked it as only one who has been truly hungry before could understand. When he was finished, Kabuto held out a hand for the tray, which Naruto handed him. Get dressed now, and when you're ready, I'll introduce you to someone you may be interested to meet. Kabuto paused, 1 foot outside the door, as Naruto, who had not spoken since he had woken up, croaked a question. Will I be meeting your master? Kabuto didn't often speak of his elusive master, but never had he mentioned the man's name, Naruto noticed, and whenever the silver-haired boy spoke of the man, it was with a note of reverence in his tone. No, Naruto. It is not yet time for you to meet my master. That time won't be for a while. Probably not until the end, in fact. For now, get dressed and when you're ready, you'll meet her, the woman who'll start to teach you a new jutsu. Kabuto left Naruto to scramble into the new clothes, which didn't take more than a minute. As Kabuto still hadn't returned, Naruto decided to try leaf floating out of sheer boredom. He didn't actually have a leaf with him, but he had the thin strip of paper that he used as a bookmark. It should have been just as easy, but Naruto discovered that he couldn't shift the paper an inch. It lay in his hand, lifeless, useless. When Kabuto re-entered the room, Naruto was panicking slightly. He shook the strip of paper in Kabuto's bemused face the moment the older boy was close enough. Kabuto's first thought was, oh shit, he's found out about what Konan's DNA allows him to do. Then it occurred to him to actually listen to what Naruto was half screaming. What did you do? I can't float anything. You took away my chakra. How am I not dead? Tell me, Kabuto smacked Naruto. Get a grip on yourself. Your chakra is intact. We didn't do anything to you. Then why won't this work? Naruto demanded, holding out the strip of paper as though it were damning evidence. Kabuto signed, feigning regret. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. With all of the jutsu you're being taught, my master deemed it prudent to prevent jutsu from being performed in this room. Why? You're progressing at a remarkable rate. It's actually quite alarming. We sealed this room on the off chance that you should, at any point, lose control of your chakra. It rarely ever happens, but you are very valuable to us, and my master wanted to make absolutely certain. Therefore, you can only use your chakra in one of the designated rooms in which you have been training, and not in here. Although, with all of the ways in which we're planning to edit your DNA, it may just be that these seals won't apply to you anymore, soon. But I'm certainly not going to tell you that. Naruto accepted the explanation with a mixture of relief and regret. Anyway, he said, never one to let panic attacks trouble him for long. Kabuto noticed sourly, who's this person I'm meeting? What jutsu will she you said she before be teaching me? All in good time, Naruto. Don't you want it to be a surprise? I hate surprises. They always seem to end in near-fatal accidents, Naruto said cheerfully and sincerely. Kabuto, who was in a bad mood, gave up and just walked on in silence, letting Naruto's chatter wash over him, replying in monosyllabic grunts and sidelong glares. Eventually, Naruto fell into a hurt silence, plodding along beside the taller boy. At last they reached a door, which Kabuto unlocked and ushered Naruto through. The younger boy stopped inside, waiting for Kabuto, but the older boy shook his head. She has her instructions. I'll keep an eye on you too, but you're going in alone. Good luck. Who knows, you might enjoy it. Kabuto closed the door behind Naruto, who looked around. Their room was at least twice the size of his own bedroom. On one wall was a long, low bookshelf, packed to bursting with tomes and scrolls. Nearby was a table loaded blank paper, scrolls, inks of various colors, pens, and one or two wooden practice weapons. There was a familiar-looking tinted, one-way mirror set into the wall opposite the door. And in the center of the room was a table, at which sat a woman. A thin, pale woman with violet eyes and unusually long red hair. And she was staring at Naruto as though she had seen a ghost. The Kyuubi attack. Though it lasted considerably less than 24 hours, it was an event that would live forever in infamy for the citizens of Konoha. Arguably, the catastrophic event was even more devastating than the three great shinobi wars that had preceded it. It was a day of panic, chaos, and destruction. Families were slaughtered, separated, young children watched their parents die before their eyes, whole sectors of the mighty village were flattened. The shinobi did all they could to restrain the beast, but they were no match. They were cut down in swaths. It was so much worse than a war, it was genocide. Until one man stepped forward. A man who, far from lurking behind the scenes pulling strings and giving orders as he could have been doing, had been fighting on the front line the entire time. Finally, sweating, shaking, chakra too low for comfort, he conceded to the one course of action that he ought to have known from the start was the only way. He retired to his wife's side. She was pale and sweating, but her eyes shone brightly, attentively, as she clutched her newborn son. Minato sighed. Kushina did not deserve this, did not deserve all that had happened on that day. Having her son threatened and then snatched away from her mere hours after he had been born, having the demon fox ripped from her body. And she doesn't deserve what I'm about to do to her. If she never forgives me, it will be too merciful a punishment for what I've done, Minato thought, staring sadly at Kushina. How strong she looked despite the fact that she was exhausted beyond belief and had not risen to greet him. Minato. How goes it? Do you need my help? Kushina sat up, carefully shifting Naruto in her arms as she moved. As a matter of fact, I do, Kushina, badly. It is a thing I would never ask of you unless the circumstances were dire. And they are. In fact, dire is too small a word for it. Appalling. Cataclysmic. Kushina studied the man before her, the man she loved more than any other, save perhaps the child in her arms. His face was a smorgasbord of emotions, terror, guilt, determination, and sorrow. You're not here to discuss semantics. Minato, what's going on? If what you have to ask of me is so important, then get on with it, or isn't time of the essence? It is indeed. Minato approached Kushina and crouched beside her bed. Leaning forward and putting a hand on her shoulder, he rested the cold, smooth metal of his hite against Kushina's forehead for a brief moment, before shifting so he could whisper in her ear. After less than a minute, he felt the red-haired woman stiffen. Careful not to disturb Naruto, Kushina put out a hand and placed it on Minato's shoulder, moving him back just far enough so that she could look him right in the eyes. She seemed to stare for an eternity. Minato could not gather anything at all from her expression and resisted both the urge to fidget and to remind her that precious seconds were slipping away. Finally, Kushina asked in a calculated, clinical voice, how many deaths? If I do not do this, perhaps hundreds of thousands, Minato replied. And there's no other way, believe me, if there were one more way, just one, any one, I would act on it in an instant. But I can see no other way. Naruto should be none the worse for it, though. After all, you were fine, And he's still an Uzumaki by blood. Kushina's eyes narrowed. It is not the life I would have chosen for him. Nor me. But we can help. He won't be alone. Kushina sighed. She lifted the baby whom she still held and looked him full in the face. Naruto sleepily blinked eyes as brilliant a blue as those of his father. You look like him, Kushina murmured. She drew a long, shuddering breath. Take care of him, Naruto. I love you. She softly kissed the boy on the forehead, gave him one final squeeze, and then held him out to Minato, who received the boy reverently, blinking tears out of his eyes. Kushina, but the red-haired woman cut him off. I know. I love you, too. Both of you. No matter what. Just do me a favor and come back afterwards. Minato nodded, though a dull, blank buzzing filled his head. How can I lie to her? What kind of person am I that I could do this to my own family? He heaved a ragged breath. Please stay safe. It will all be over soon, and then we can be together again. Kushina nodded mutely as Minato wrapped Naruto securely in his blanket. Then Minato disappeared in the smallest wisp of smoke, meeting Kushina's eyes one last time as he vanished. Minato walled up his emotions, penning them into a tiny corner in his mind into which he refused to look. He had to be completely objective, to forget whom he was condemning to a life bound to the most powerful demon of the 9 Biju. And, of course, he was trying to forget about what he was preparing to do to himself. He had known all along that it was not possible for him to either seal all of the Kyuubi's power away or to kill it. Therefore, he would have to do both: seal half of the power and kill the rest. Seal it in himself and kill it, end him with it. The seal, an elaborate variation on a basic storage seal, took no more than a scant 10 minutes to complete for one such as Minato who had trained in Fuinjutsu under Kushina. He wished it could have taken 10 years, that he could have stretched out the time between then and when he would have to look upon his son for the last time. Minato knew he was already dying. His fight with Madara had weakened him, the Kyuubi had injured him, and his chakra was quickly dwindling after hours of battling on the front line. He had already arranged his contract with the Shinigami so that he would seize what was left of the Kyuubi when he would be coming for Minato's soul anyway, and take both with him to the realm of the deceased. In effect, he was already dead. The Minato that still walked the earth, the Minato who still held breath in his lungs, the Minato about to seal his son's fate as readily as he had sealed his own, that Minato was little more than a specter, an imprint of his living self, going about unfinished business before it would be allowed to rest in peace, forevermore. Minato had dispatched messages to both Jiraiya and Sarutobi with specific instructions regarding Naruto and Kushina. All that remained was to act. Stepping out from what shelter flimsy walls, fragile windows, and shoddy roofing could provide from the raging beast, Minato summoned his old, trusted comrade, Gamabunta, a toad of such immensity that it rivaled even the Kyuubi no Yoko. Or so Minato hoped. The plan was not to get Gamabunta killed, after all, by pitting him against someone too far out of his weight class strength-wise. Gamabunta, I'm sorry to ask this of you, but can you possibly hold him off for a bit while I do this? Minato called, perched atop the great toad's skull. That little guy? Not a chance. I can buy you maybe a minute or two at a stretch, but there's no chance of me holding it off for any longer. A minute should be enough. And Gamabunta? Yes? Thank you. For everything. Goodbye, my friend. Gamabunta did not respond, toads not being prone to overly emotional displays. Instead he approached the snapping, snarling demon with several long bounds. Here Fluffy, Fluffy, Fluffy. With a slithering clang he drew his enormous tanto and moved in to engage to the fox, fending off tails left and right. Narrowly, he dodged an Amari. He darted and leapt, cavorted and slashed, not allowing the Kyuubi to take its attention from him for even a moment. Whenever you're ready, he growled to Minato. Right. Minato took a deep breath and unwrapped the blanket that coddled his son. For a moment he gazed at Naruto, and a certain sense of surrealism seemed to assert itself. Standing on a giant toad, facing down a fox that would like nothing better than the death of every human in existence, and nothing separates my dying in vain and my dying a hero but a few lines of ink and an infant. May as well get on with it. Bracing his feet to stabilize himself against Gamabunta's erratic movements, he began making one-handed seals. In less than 10 seconds, the command was complete. The message had been sent. The end was now. Several unsteady seconds passed, Minato, unwilling to turn around, to stare death in the face sooner than absolutely necessary, on tenterhooks, waiting to feel something. Without warning, Minato experienced a curious, rather unpleasant fluttering sensation in the vicinity of his chest. He looked down to see the altogether terrifying sight of a hand forcing through his body as if he were no more than a cloud of steam. A purple, larger-than-life hand extending right through the center of his chest. Though Minato was frozen to the spot, unable to twist around and check, he knew that behind him loomed the Shinigami, god of death, a knife in his teeth and a vortex in his eyes. As of now, my patron god. The wrist and forearm to which the hand was attached suddenly lengthened, and Minato gasped as his eyes automatically tracked the movements of the appendage, unable to feel it at all, save for a very faint, unpleasant dragging sensation in his chest cavity. Minato was forced to watch as the powerful hand seized hold of the thrashing demon and dragged it back, closer and closer to Minato and the bundle of blanket that he clutched. Working swiftly and deftly, the Shinigami lopped off a good half off the mass of Yuki and reeled it in, accompanied by the screeches and growls of the beast as it recognized what was happening. It struggled harder than ever against the grip of the god, writhing and slashing and biting, but to no avail. Dazedly, gazing at the purple hand, half deafened by the commotion, Minato watched in admiration as the Shinigami neatly coiled the Yuki, draining it into the seal painted over Naruto's abdomen and fixing it there with an elegant sealing that would have taken Minato several lifetimes to duplicate. That task was finished in under a minute, and it was only once Minato felt the prickling on the back of his neck and the shifting sensation in his chest that meant that the Shinigami had moved on to him that he registered Naruto's crying, his wails vying with those of the greatly weakened Kyuubi. Greatly weakened, but still a threat. No backing out. I'm sorry, Naruto. Once again the purple hand extended and seized the thrashing, screaming demon. This time, Minato, though he could just hear the great death god's voice whispering, resonating in his own mind. Yoink! With a cold slithering rush, the great hand was jerked out of Minato's body, dragging the Kyuubi's remaining Yuki through after, sealing it as it entered Minato's chest so that all that the hand was pulling out of the other side was a thin, translucent, anguished something. Minato's soul, held painfully tightly by the hair, dragged from the realm of the living, the newly constructed seal on its stomach glowing with malignant red light. That soul, the very human essence of the best-loved Hokage ever to grace the village with his affections, was gone, pulled down to the depths of the realm of death, over which the Shinigami held court. And the last and the most terrible of the 9 Biju with it. Kushina had still been weak, and it was several days before she was strong enough to leave the safe house in which she had been left outside of the village, out of danger. In the confusion of the aftermath of the Kyuubi attack, amid the rubble and stricken villagers, it was an easy task to get back within the partially pulverized walls, a fact that worried Kushina slightly. These trivial worries were swept away at once, however, when she learned what had become of her family. When Kushina learned of Minato's death, she was in paroxysms of grief. Who gave him permission to sacrifice his own life and leave me here, stranded amongst the living with our son? What gives him the right to lay down his life for this village even if it means abandoning his family? And yet Kushina knew that what her husband had done was right. This was how it should be. The great leader risking it all for his people. In a way, under the fury, shock and anguish, Kushina was more proud of her husband than she had ever been in his life. And that's what really broke her heart. But Kushina was a tough, seasoned kunoichi and an Uzumaki to boot, so, repressing her sorrow for the time being, she set out to discover what had become of her newborn child. There would be time enough to grieve later. Kushina stood before Sarutobi's desk. She had been completely surprised when, for the first time ever, she had had to make an appointment to see the old man. But, after all, Konoha was far from repaired, not even close, and it suddenly seemed as though the Hokage was needed everywhere at once. Even as Kushina stood before him, Sarutobi was busily signing some of the papers he had dragged from under the massive drift that obscured his desk and puddled on the floor around it. Sarutobi's words were clipped, hectic, distracted. I'm sorry, Kushina, the orphanages are completely flooded. All of them. Overflowing and understaffed. We've had to beg some of the larger clans and civilian families with homes still standing to take in children with no place to stay. And Kusagakure and Yugakure are being absolutely no help at all. I'm meeting with them later today, but my hopes aren't high. What orphanage records exist are in utter chaos, and so many of my best shinobi were killed that I can't spare you any at all. We're spread far too thin as it is. If any of the other elemental nations took it into their heads to attack us right now, we would fall, no doubt about it. Kushina held her temper in check, but her voice came out sharp nonetheless. Hokage-sama, I understand how disorganized everything is at this time, but Naruto isn't just any child. He is a Jinchuriki and he is Minato's son. It is as much his doing that Konoha still exists at all as it is my husband's. If you can't bring yourself to spare one single Anbu to help me find him, at least promise not to prevent me doing whatever I deem necessary to find my child. You owe me that much. You owe Minato far more than that much. Sarutobi sighed, his pen ceasing for a moment in its relentless signing. He did not make eye contact with Kushina, but spoke quietly to the papers before him. No one's denying what your husband did or how important it is to find Naruto. I might be able to have Anbu free to begin assisting you in looking for him in as soon as a month or two. But for now you'll have to search alone. And yes, before you ask again, of course you have permission to do whatever you deem necessary to find Naruto. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Kushina said tightly, wheeling on the spot and marching out of the office. She slid the door shut behind her with a clap, which caused a small avalanche of papers to slide off of the heaps on Sarutobi's desk and join their brethren on the floor. Sarutobi let out a tired sigh, gathered up the papers he had signed already and his notes for the meeting with the representatives from Kusagakure and Yugakure, picked up his hat, and left, sliding the door closed much more gently than Kushina had done, blocking out the depressing sight of the drifts of fluttering whiteness. Kushina spent weeks scouring the village. Consequently, she got to see the extent of the damage the Kyuubi had wrought. Homes and shops were demolished, cutting a huge swath of destruction through the once teeming village, which marked the path of the mighty demon. Bricks had been reduced to dust and rubble and trees were little more than ash and kindling. Though bodies no longer littered the streets, those having been the first priorities to be cleared away, rusty red-brown stains of dried blood still decorated the streets in certain sectors of the village. The sights of destruction sent shivers chasing down Kushina's back. She had no trouble picturing her son as one of those who had died, bleeding out, crying, alone. No, Minato would have made sure to get Naruto to safety before, well, he would have made sure our son was safe. Kushina also discovered fairly early in her rounds of the various orphanages, well, the ones that remained after the attack, anyway, quite a few of the orphanages were actually different buildings that had been repurposed after the attack, that Sarutobi had not been exaggerating. It was, quite simply, utter chaos. There were far too many children crammed into each orphanage and nowhere near enough adults to keep track of them. Quite a few of the older children had taken charge, helping out wherever they could. Kushina described Naruto to those who were supposed to be taking care of the children as best she could, but most of the time, whoever she was speaking to would not even be able to tell her how many children there were in the building, let alone if there was one specific child who matched her description. In addition to this, there were a few clans and quite a large number of civilians who had taken in a couple of children each, and it was impossible for her to find and search all of these places single-handedly. And yet she persisted, despite the fact that the children didn't so much as stay in the same place from day to day, shuffled from one orphanage to another, or moving out to live with a new family. After 3 weeks, just when things were starting to calm down and Kushina despaired of ever seeing her son again, she began to hear the most intriguing rumors. It seemed that Orochimaru, Kushina gave the faintest of shudders. She had heard that name from Minato's old sensei, Jiraiya, and never accompanied by any story she would describe as palatable, was collecting children. On the surface, this seemed a simple enough gesture, providing care and shelter to a large number of orphan children of various ages in order to ease Konoha's troubles, even a little. But Kushina couldn't help but be suspicious of the snake Sanin, particularly as the rumors seemed to suggest that his methods for gathering the children weren't completely, shall we say, legitimate. All the same, she had not yet found her son, and now that she knew that a large number of children from Konoha were in the care of Orochimaru, she knew her next destination, the next place she would look. When the red-haired woman approached the pale Sanin, Orochimaru's pulse quickened and he had to work hard to disguise both his surprise and his greed. The hot-blooded habanero of Konoha, seal mistress and the Yondaime's widow. It was a minute before Orochimaru understood what she was asking him. So, Kushina Uzumaki has misplaced her son and thinks I may have inadvertently collected him? Perhaps I can use this to my advantage. And so Orochimaru began to speak, spinning Kushina an elaborate lie. Yes, of course, Kushina-san. I have an infant who fits your description. Blue eyes and blonde hair. Whisker marks on his cheeks. That's the one. And if you come with me, you will be reunited shortly. No trouble, I'll take you there personally. Orochimaru led her to one of his old, all but abandoned bases, no more than a temporary bolt hole, really, conveniently situated just outside the confines of Konoha. Orochimaru crossed quickly to the cabinets, trying not to draw attention to the dust that had settled there of late. Quickly, with his back turned so that Kushina could not see, Orochimaru extracted 3 glass vials from the cabinet and, double-checking the labels, wiped out a slightly gritty glass with a rag and poured in the liquids, as well as a shot of sake. He turned back to Kushina, smiling, holding the glass. Would you like a drink, Kushina-san, before we go retrieve your son? He is being treated perfectly well, of course. Go on, have a drink. Really? Was he sure? Oh well, all right then. Orochimaru watched Kushina give the drink a discreet sniff. He held his breath, but he needn't have worried. Apparently not detecting anything under the smell of the sake, and anyway, relief about being finally reunited with her son, whom she hadn't seen since the day of his birth, making her less cautious than she would ordinarily be. Kushina took a sip. Tasting nothing but slightly diluted sake, Kushina finished off the glass. Now, would Orochimaru please take her to her son? But of course, Kushina-san. This was just a short stop I had to make on the way to pick something up. Come along. Turning away, Orochimaru caught a flicker of apprehension on Kushina's face, but she followed him without hesitation when they began traveling farther and farther from Konoha. They were less than a quarter of a mile from their destination when Kushina began to sway. Her leaps they were, naturally, traveling shinobi style. Leaping from branch to branch grew sloppy and uncoordinated. Finally, Orochimaru was just in time to catch Kushina before she fell out of the tree and hit the hard earth. From there, it was a luckily short distance to carry her. When Orochimaru arrived at his private lab, he handed the unconscious woman to one of his lab assistants with instructions to lock her up in one of the cells with the chakra-dampening seals in the walls, inaccessible to the seal mistress so there would be no tampering. The assistant bowed his head and scurried off, the red-haired woman's head lolling against his chest. Orochimaru then turned to another one of assistants and gave him specific instructions about what Kushina was to be fed for the duration of her stay. While that assistant left to follow Orochimaru's directions, the snake Sannin stood perfectly still, allowing his shoulders to relax and his breathing to slow for a moment. Standing by himself in the middle of one of his labs, Orochimaru gave a thin, tight-lipped smile. Making his way to his study, he decided to catch up on reading some of the newer report files from his experiments there before his new prisoner woke up. A few hours later, a lab assistant tapped timidly on the study door and entered bearing a tray of food. "The prisoner is awake, Orochimaru-sama," the man said, holding out the tray. Orochimaru stood and crossed to the door, relieving the man of the tray as he went. Making his way down to the holding cells, Orochimaru enjoyed, as always, the effect that his mere presence had among his captives. Some fell silent and shrank away from the doors of their cells while others threw themselves against the doors, screaming insults and trying to get at the pale man. However, Orochimaru soon passed through this section and within a minute was walking among the isolation rooms, each one soundproofed and sealed to dampen the chakra of the occupant. Stopping before one particular door and sparing a hand to unlock the door, Orochimaru paused only to cloak himself in a jutsu that, while not able to completely mitigate the chakra-dampening seals, would nonetheless stop him from feeling the drain quite as much as the prisoner would. Orochimaru entered, not fearing that the prisoner would try to escape as she was weak and groggy from the anesthetic he had given her and, in any case, was cuffed and bound to the wall by a length of chain. Orochimaru set down the tray of food and sat down with his back against the wall. Kushina, who was seated as he was, with her back against the wall opposite the door, did not move toward the tray. Her eyes followed her captor mistrustfully. "Ah, good. I should have known she wasn't one of those prisoners who is too naive to realize she has been tricked. That will save me having to explain." After allowing the silence to stretch on uninterrupted for several minutes, Orochimaru broke it. "I suggest you eat the food I brought, Uzumaki-san. If your stubbornness persists and you refuse, I can guarantee you'll be dead before the day is out." Orochimaru, watching Kushina's eyes through the semi-darkness, caught a flash of what could best be described as scorn. "You don't believe me? Well, consider this. You don't really think that sake and the anesthetic were the only things you drank, do you?" This time, a look of accusation crossed Kushina's face. "I see you refuse to speak. But worry not, I'll answer the question that must be on the tip of your tongue." A humorless smile stretched the waxy skin across the snake Sannin's sharp cheekbones. "Now, Orochimaru-sama, what else did you put in Kushina's drink?" he mused to himself. He pretended to think, studying Kushina out of the corner of his eye, his gaze never leaving her face. "Well, Orochimaru-sama," he answered himself, "I may have possibly slipped in a little squatter poison. Harmless, really, or at least, it will be to Kushina if she continues taking the antidote that I was thoughtful enough to put in her drink." There was no denying it, Kushina had definitely looked alarmed when he mentioned the squatter poison. "So you see, Kushina, that poison will sit in your body for as long as I wanted to, months, years, decades, even, but only if you keep taking the antidote. Miss even one dosage and the poison will begin to act within 6 hours. You will die by inches. Sometimes it takes as much as 2 weeks to die of this particular poison. Imagine it. 2 weeks of agony, of sweat and screaming until you're so hoarse that the pain even prevents you from blacking out and escaping in that way. And what a shame that would be, if you were to die here in this little cell, away from anyone who would care if you were to cease to exist. I guess that would make your son, little Naruto, an orphan, wouldn't it? Orochimaru paused, looking for a reaction. At the mention of her son, Kushina seemed to withdraw into herself. Her eyes became blank and dull and her shoulders slumped a fraction of an inch. Orochimaru knew he had her. It was time to leave. Orochimaru stood up and opened the door, resting his hand on the knob. I'd suggest you eat, Uzumaki-san. You won't get the antidote until you do, and you can never find your son if you're dead. The snake Sanin left, locking the door behind him. Sarutobi peered at the infant before him. Yes, he matches Kushina's description, and he's the right age. It was almost 2 months since the Kyuubi attack, and Sarutobi hadn't seen or heard from Kushina for several weeks. Sarutobi had considered sending out shinobi to find her, but though no new disasters had occurred since the Kyuubi attack, all of the shinobi of Konoha were widely scattered, out on missions to try and raise money to finish repairs in the village and to reassure the fire daimyo that they could already handle missions and that he needn't send new missions to other villages instead. Maybe if Kushina hasn't shown up in a few more weeks, I'll send someone to look for her, Sarutobi thought. What would you like done with the demon, Hokage-sama? The Anbu who was holding Naruto asked. Sarutobi looked up sharply. First off, you can drop the demon talk. Naruto is as much a hero as the Yondaime was in the defeat of the Kyuubi and will be treated as such. Secondly, I think the best thing would be to let Naruto live at the hospital for now. His mother shouldn't be away for too much longer, and then she can take him home. As it happened, Sarutobi would end up having to send out that search party in a few weeks' time to find the missing red-haired Kunoichi. But the party would return empty-handed, unable to find Kushina after a thorough search of the neighboring villages and the woodlands surrounding Konoha. Unsure of what to do with Naruto, Sarutobi got him his own apartment when the boy was 2 years old. Sarutobi visited the boy faithfully every day and often stopped by and brought Naruto to the Hokage Tower with him in the mornings. To keep the boy out of trouble, he ended up enrolling Naruto in the Shinobi Academy 2 years early. He encouraged Naruto to be independent and to try and make friends with the older children in his classes as well as kids his own age. Occasionally, over the years, Sarutobi would wonder what became of Kushina. 6 months after her initial imprisonment, Kushina was as stubborn as ever. Though she faithfully ate the food provided to her every day and even occasionally spoke, she utterly refused to say a word on any of the topics that so interested her captor. Though Orochimaru visited several times a month, his visits became less frequent with every passing month as Kushina refused to speak on the subjects of her husband, her son, her sealing techniques, or Konoha. The most her usually got out of her were a few curt, sarcastic comments. That's when Mizuki came up with a brilliant idea. Mizuki was a recently acquired member of Orochimaru's organization. As a sensei at the Shinobi Academy, Mizuki was well placed to be an inconspicuous information gatherer. The perfect spy. Mizuki's suggestion came in the form of a note, hand-delivered to Orochimaru by one of his subordinates who had been to a secret meeting with Mizuki to get the most recent update on the goings-on within Orochimaru's old village. The note took the form of a photograph, taken of the 7-month-old infant who so resembled his father. On the back of the envelope was written, in Mizuki's cramped hand for his mother's cooperation. Delighted, Orochimaru hastened down to the cell in which Kushina reposed. When the door opened, Kushina raised an eyebrow, it not being time for her next meal yet. She did not stand, but then, she never did for Orochimaru, preferring to remain seated with her back against the wall. What is it you want? She asked harshly. Ah, don't take that tone with me, Uzumaki-san. I bring good news, don't you want to see? Orochimaru said, holding up the photo so that all Kushina could see was the back. If you consider it good news, then no, was Kushina's terse reply. But this, I think, will interest you even more than it does me. You see, one of my agents has found your son. Kushina bit her lip to stop herself from crying out. Orochimaru could see that her body was tensing, longing to spring up and snatch the photo from him, no doubt. Orochimaru laughed softly. Oh no, don't get up on my account. Here you are, no strings attached. Orochimaru held out the photo and Kushina leaned forward and took it from his pale, long-fingered grip. For a long moment Kushina's eyes played over the image, drinking it in. Orochimaru let her have her moment before her took the photo back. She resisted for a moment but then desisted, allowing him to pull the photo from her suddenly slack grip. Naruto, Kushina whispered, and Orochimaru thought that, for the first time since her imprisonment, the red-haired woman was about to cry. Suppressing his gloating grin, Orochimaru left immediately. Excellent. If this has the desired effect, it will prevent her from trying to stop taking her antidote for the sake of someday seeing her son. All the same, It may be a good idea to have Mizuki continue to send pictures of her son. Every few months should be enough, but not too regularly. If she's expecting it, there's no fun in it. And so Orochimaru continued to visit Kushina, though the visits became much shorter and less frequent over the years. When Orochimaru joined Akatsuki, he left instructions for Kushina to be supplied with her daily antidote as per usual in his absence, though of course she wouldn't receive news of her son for the duration of the Snake Sanin's allegiance to Akatsuki. And once Orochimaru returned, bent on making the perfect skin to inhabit, he all but forgot about the red-haired Kunoichi, though she was still being fed the correct antidote every day, the lab assistant's instructions on that point never having been revised. And thus Kushina was kept alive, tormented by the grief of watching her son grow up through captured stills of his life and the knowledge that she could not influence it. Until one day, Kushina lifted her head as she heard the scrape of a key in her lock. She adjusted the chains around her wrists so they would neither rattle nor scrape along the sore, flayed parts of her wrists. She frowned as a boy entered her cell, a boy she had never seen before. He couldn't be more than 15 years old, with mid-length silver hair and black eyes behind round glasses. He gave her a smile and she shivered involuntarily. It was the same sort of smile Orochimaru had always used to give her when he was about to deliver news about her son that he knew would make her want to break down and weep. The smile looked strangely out of place on the smooth face of this teenage boy. The boy approached her, pulling a pair of chakra-dampening cuffs from a weapons pouch he wore. He snapped the cuffs around her wrists before unchaining her from the wall and firmly taking hold of the short chain that connected the two cuffs. "Who are you, boy?" Kushina asked. "Kabuto," the boy replied, leading Kushina from the room by her cuffs. "And where are you taking me, boy?" "Where my master wills you to go. To meet your son." Kushina stopped dead in her tracks, but Kabuto pulled her on with an impatient shake of the cuffs. "Excuse me? Orochimaru-sama delegated to me the task of explaining your guidelines to you. Orochimaru-sama wishes for you to teach Naruto sealing, but there are certain things you may not discuss with him. If you do not comply with my master's wishes, if you break the rules and bring up the wrong topic, we will kill Naruto. Slowly, do you understand?" "Naturally," Kushina said dryly, hiding her anxiety. "And I take it you'll be watching me every second I'm with my son, if it really is my son you're taking me to." "Of course. Now, the rules. You are not to mention that you are the boy's mother. You are not to mention the Yondaime or anything at all pertaining to Konoha. Keep in mind, if you're not sure if it's against the rules, it is. Do not speak of the Kyuubi or of Jinchuriki. Do not mention Orochimaru's name. Do not remove materials from the room. Do not perform unauthorized jutsu. And lastly, do not attempt to get around to rules by passing notes or using code or methods of communication of any kind. You will be routinely searched after each lesson with the boy." By this time the two of them had reached a plain door and Kabuto had removed one hand from Kushina's cuffs in order to unlock the door. He led Kushina into the large, brightly lit room and seated her in a plain, straight-backed wooden chair before the long table. He removed Kushina's handcuffs. Kushina immediately felt the difference as she began to regain control of her chakra for the first time in years. True, it was only the tiniest of trickles, and she knew she wouldn't be up to full capacity for quite some time, but it made her feel more at ease already. She rubbed her chafed wrists, speaking to cover her elation. "With all these rules, I feel like I'm back at the academy. Put everything away when you're finished. No talking while sensei is talking. Wait your turn and share. No cursing. Of course, it was always that last one I had the most trouble following." Kabuto chuckled. "Now I see where Naruto gets it," he said. Kushina snorted. "About this, Naruto, I'm supposed to be teaching. Well, I bet we're not thinking of the same boy. There's no way any son of mine would end up here. Not with the people watching over him that he's got." "Oh, you'd be surprised. In fact, Naruto came quite willingly." Kushina couldn't help but feel a deep sense of frustrated regret at those words. As hard as she had been trying to keep from getting her hopes up, she had really and truly thought, for just a moment, that there was a chance that she was about to see her son. Of course, that would mean Orochimaru had control of him, but if it really was Kushina's Naruto, she was confident that she could work out a way to free both her and him if need be. But if this boy of whom Kabuto was speaking had come willingly, in that case, it definitely isn't my Naruto, Kushina said firmly. "We'll see," was Kabuto's only answer. "I'm going to go and retrieve him now. Please bear in mind that you will be monitored in here at all times, even in my absence, and that any attempt by you to break any of the aforementioned rules will result in your son being hurt." Kabuto left, locking the door behind him with a resounding click. Kushina sat up straight in the chair and looked around, carefully not looking at the tinted two-way sheet of mirrored glass set into the far wall opposite the door and taking stock of the materials that she was being provided for the task of teaching about seals. Not that she actually planned to teach any lackey of Orochimaru's about the true mysteries of quality seals, but if she was going to fake it convincingly, it was a good idea to know what she was going to be using. The supplies with which the room was stocked met her grudging approval. There were different colors of inks and brushes and even different types of paper and a few blunted practice weapons. The low bookshelves by the wall were crammed with texts, manuals, and scrolls, and there were even a few pieces of colored chalk, presumably for drawing on the whitish plasticine floor tiles or for demonstrating how seals could be applied to the body. Even if they do frisk me every time I leave the room, it should still be possible for me to smuggle out enough materials over a long period of time to make a seal to get me out of my cell, depending, of course, how often I'm brought to this room. I could make an exploding seal to blast the door open, but that might not be enough to get past any guards I encounter or to leave the labs entirely. How about a seal that feeds on the chakra that composes the dampening seals in the walls of my cell? That could work. Or a variation. A sort of parasite seal that piggybacks on the chakra dampening seals that will feed me back any chakra that the chakra dampening seals siphon off for as long as I'm in the room. Either one of those ideas would allow me to regain my chakra over a short period of time, maybe a matter of days, and from there it would be simple for me to fight my way out. I'll have to work on designing the seals, but that can wait until I'm back in my cell and not being monitored around the clock. Oh, Orochimaru, you think you've got me beaten and cornered, but this situation is just asking to be exploited. When I leave, I'd have to deal with the squatter poison in my system, but that shouldn't be too hard if I have the proper materials. A seal that combines properties of both vacuum and storage seals could gather the poison into one part of my body. True, that might weaken the part in which it's gathered, but using the right medical jutsu with a fuinjutsu spin on it, the seal can be removed, taking the poison sealed inside with it. Of course, to design the seal to attract the poison in the first place, I'd need a sample of the specific type of poison. I guess the solution to that lies in the antidote that Orochimaru's lackeys dose me with every day. If I can seal up a bit of each type of food that they give me for a day, one of the items is sure to have the antidote in it which, once analyzed, will tell me what poison I need to create the vacuum seal for. For the first time in years, Kushina was thinking like her old, optimistic self. A person whose determination knew no bounds and who was a genius at designing seals. However, her conscience gave her no peace. What of this Naruto boy I'm supposed to teach? Should I plan to break him out too? Kushina shook her head a little. He's not my Naruto. He volunteered to work for Orochimaru. Breaking him out would be a completely unnecessary risk. I would do it in a heartbeat if he actually was my son, but since he's not. Just then Kushina heard the key slide into the lock and the sharp clunk as the lock turned over. The door opened and a boy stepped through, looking over his shoulder inquiringly. From outside the door Kushina heard Kabuto's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. Then the door was swung closed behind the boy who had entered, leaving Kabuto on the outside. The boy turned. His eyes swept the room before coming to rest on Kushina's face. Violet locked onto bright blue. Kushina felt the blood drain from her face and knew she was staring at the poor boy, but she couldn't help it. You really do look like your father, Naruto, blonde hair, blue eyes and all. That settles it. We're both getting out of here just as soon as I can finish that seal. Naruto gave the woman a tentative smile. Hello. Kabuto said you would be teaching me some kind of new jutsu. Naruto took a step forward, then another, wishing the woman would stop staring at him and say something. The bright violet eyes in the gaunt, pale face were more than a little unnerving. He took a seat in the chair opposite her. She remained silent. What should I call you? Naruto ventured. After a minute or so, during which she didn't so much as acknowledge the question, the woman cleared her throat and spoke. Your name is Naruto, isn't it? Yes, and you are? Naruto asked, squirming in his seat under her intense scrutiny. My name is Kushina, but, here she flicked a nervous look at the tinted mirror set into the wall before a sort of determination seemed to steal over her features. But you can call me Ka-chan, she finished firmly. Naruto raised his eyebrows in surprise, his smile returning to his face. You can't be that bad, then, he said. I've never had a mother, but I guess I could give it a try, Ka-sensei. Kushina smiled a little for the first time and seemed settled into her chair, a bit more relaxed and at ease than she had seemed previously. You'd be what, 10 years old, Naruto? Yep. I'm going to be the youngest Hokage yet, one to surpass the previous 4, Naruto declared happily. Kushina beamed, working hard not to let her sadness and pain show on her face. Once she was sure that her voice would be steady, she said, Well, if that's so, you'll need to learn about Fuinjutsu. Don't you think a Hokage should know about seals, Naruto? Naruto shrugged. Probably. It sounds useful, though I've only come across it in the books Kabuto gave me as a passing mention. Is that what you're going to teach me? Yes. We ought to start today and make the most out of our time together. If you're going to be the youngest Hokage yet, you'll have to learn as much as you can. Kushina said enthusiastically, standing up and taking a step toward the table that was loaded with supplies. Yeah. Naruto stood up and followed her, watching carefully as she chose paper and pens from among the selection. She handed him the same as what she took and they both sat down again. Kushina seemed to hesitate, frowning at the paper under her hands a bit. What kind of seal will you teach me first? Naruto prompted. Yes, of course, Kushina said quickly. Let's think. How about, she glanced toward the tinted mirror once more, but this time Naruto noticed that there was a sly, mischievous tilt to her smile and an almost vindictive look in her eyes. Exploding seals? Sounds good to me, Naruto said, picking up his pen. Hang on, Kushina said. First things first. Have you learned to channel chakra into objects yet? Naruto shook his head. Well, no help for that. You'll just have to learn as we go, she said briskly. Kushina began to trace symbols on her paper, explaining what each one was called and what it was used for. Occasionally she would draw several symbols or kanji interlocking and describe how the purpose of each affected the others when they were arranged together. Finally, when she had traced out every one of the relatively few symbols necessary for making an exploding tag and given Naruto a thorough grounding on how each worked when chakra was applied, she started expounding on how different amounts or different types of chakra would affect the seal while it was being made. Pausing only for breath, Kushina went on, asking Naruto detailed questions and having him answer back to her what she had said, just to make sure he had been listening. She was pleased to discover that he seemed fascinated by the subject and was, for the most part, able to repeat things perfectly to the word after hearing them only once. He seemed to have an instinctive knack, posing question after question, proposing combinations, variations, and possible applications for various types of seals he had heard of before. Kushina could see that it wouldn't be long before Naruto was designing his own seals for shinobi or everyday uses. Naruto could easily have felt overwhelmed by the flood of information, but the boy seemed to drink it up, fitting each new data point into his constantly expanding map of the shinobi world with ease. Soon, he was not only proposing uses for certain seals, but was thinking of ways to combine seals with other jutsu, either while the seals were being made or while they were being used. Kushina was just the kind of sensei he needed. She answered every one of his questions instantly and in such detail that he always got more information than he had been seeking. When Naruto seemed uncertain on a point, Kushina could always find a way to make him understand. Finally, Kushina instructed Naruto to begin tracing out the symbols and seeing where they could fit together. As he complied, Kushina described as best she could how one went about channeling chakra into a seal as it was crafted. Naruto nodded, he understood just fine. It was the application that was the tricky part. Naruto was rather pleased when he found that his chakra control had improved vastly since Kabuto had begun teaching him. He was also a bit confused, as he hadn't been aware that his chakra control had improved quite to the level it had. In any case, he found it a bit hard to both channel his chakra and form the kanji correctly. He was also having a bit of trouble channeling the chakra into the letters as he penned them, as Kushina-sensei had described. He could picture what was supposed to happen all right, but he couldn't make it work the first few times. However, when Kushina suggested he take a break, he refused, insisting he would get the hang of it. Eventually, he did. It was only 20 minutes or so since he had first tried and the table before him was littered with papers, each one coded, sometimes on both sides, by symbols, some sprawling or cramped, some single or in interlocking groups. In addition to this, some of the pages bore notes about seals or aspects of same that Naruto wanted to experiment with. An idea would have occurred to him and he wrote it down at once so he could think about it later and not be distracted from the task at hand. When Kushina picked up a few of the sheets lying scattered on the table, she noticed the notes on exploding seals. The ideas there were genius for someone who had only begun to learn about seals a few hours ago. He had notes on controlling the blast radius of an explosion and on delayed explosions. Naruto's first successful exploding seal was a small one drawn in the corner of an already full page. He had really been concentrating while he had crafted it, visualizing the chakra imbuing the ink and activating the purpose of the various signs and symbols. When the seal was completed, the last line drawn, Naruto got a peculiar feeling, a sense of completion and satisfaction. "Hey, I think I did it," he exclaimed. Kushina picked up the sheet, examining the seal minutely. "Looks good to me," she said. And the chakra in it feels alright, too. Want to test it? Yes, I do. Naruto took the page back from Kushina and carefully tore the paper around the one successful seal, making sure not to rip through any of the lines. Then he placed it on the floor. Do you remember how I showed you to set it off? Kushina asked. Naruto laughed. How could I forget? And thus the pyromaniac was born, Kushina said wryly. What? Never mind. Kushina watched Naruto as he positioned the tag so it was far enough away from the tables and walls of the room for his standards. Which meant that something was probably going to catch fire if Kushina didn't step in. As the red-haired woman moved forward and shifted the tag farther away from the supply table, she noticed just how excited and jittery Naruto was. I'm surprised you managed to stay still for long enough to make an exploding tag in one sitting, she commented. Yeah, Naruto said. Actually, so am I, a little. Before I came here, there's no way I could have either sat still for that long or controlled my chakra well enough to have made a seal. It's probably a combination of Kabuto's help and the fact that sealing is actually really interesting. Kushina didn't say anything for a moment, but she also didn't move, meaning that Naruto couldn't activate the seal, as she was sitting so close to it still. Suddenly, she asked, How did you come to be here, Naruto? Naruto scratched the back of his head, slightly embarrassed. Well, I was in my last year at the Shinobi Academy and about a month ago or so, but I failed the Genin exam. I would have had to retake the whole year of classes, but one of my senseis offered for me to come here and get private training instead. So I accepted and Kabuto's been teaching me since then. Kushina stood up and retreated from the seal on the floor, drawing Naruto back with her. Okay, Naruto. Let's see what you've really learned. Go ahead and blow it up. With pleasure. Naruto formed a single hand seal, channeling chakra as he did so. The seal blew up, the paper engulfed in an enormous ball of flame, the force of which rattled the tinted window in the wall and made Naruto's ears ring faintly. When the smoke and flames finally cleared, Kushina clapped him on the shoulder. Congratulations. It works. Naruto stared at the large scorch mark on the floor, spreading from the point where the paper had been like a smoky flower or many-pointed star. Kabuto's going to kill us, he groaned. Probably, Kushina shrugged, but my impression was that that boy has way too large of a pull up his ass for someone so young. He'll deal. Naruto let out an incredulous laugh. Well, how does Kabuto act around you? Kushina asked half challengingly, half curiously. Naruto sobered somewhat. He's a pretty good teacher, Naruto admitted. He just gets impatient sometimes, though, when he does, it usually forces him to come up with a faster way to teach me, which seems to work better than more traditional methods. Apart from that, well, I think he used to see me as more of a liability, but recently, for the past few weeks, he's been treating me more like a student. But even so, every once in a while we'll be getting along fine and then he'll mention his master and he'll kind of close up. He won't answer my questions and usually he leaves soon after. Kushina bit her lip at the mention of Orochimaru, a forbidden topic, according to Kabuto. Do you know his master's name? She asked, testing. No, he always refuses to tell me, Naruto said, shaking his head. Did Kabuto give you a reason why he or his master wants to train you? Kushina asked. Naruto opened his mouth to respond, but just then Kabuto entered, leaving the door open behind him. Naruto, he said. The blonde boy turned and saw Kabuto and shut his mouth hastily. Kushina, you have concluded his lesson for today, I think. You've done well. From now on you two will be meeting for lessons once or twice a week. Come Naruto. I'll escort you to your room and then come back for you, Kushina. As Naruto left the room, he gave Kushina one last wave and a slightly guilty smile. Kushina waved back. Kabuto, who had hung back to hold the door open for Naruto, gave her a long, blank look through the lenses of his glasses before he left, locking the door behind him once more. Once Naruto was safely ensconced in his room once more, he began to pace, turning over in his head all the new things he had learned, muttering new ideas aloud as they occurred. After about 10 minutes, he went over to the tinted mirror and rapped on it sharply. Hey, are you guys taking notes? Because unless I get a desk and some paper and things, I won't be able to remember all of this stuff. No one responded to Naruto's voice. No one came to unlock his door. He shrugged. It had been worth a shot. When Kabuto finally came with Naruto's dinner, he found the boy feverishly leafing through one of his books in search of a mention of seals he remembered reading about. When Naruto heard the older boy arrive, he abandoned the task, preoccupied instead with requesting a desk, reference books on sealing, and some other note-taking supplies. Kabuto promised nothing, saying he would see what he could do and suggesting that Naruto read his assigned passage from the book Kabuto had just brought with the food. Once Kabuto had left, Naruto resumed pacing, but found himself unable to fully concentrate. Instead, he gave up and devoured the food Kabuto had brought before turning his attention to the new book. It was on basic jutsu and chakra control, as well as having a little piece on the history of Sanagakure, where many famous puppet masters were said to originate. Naruto, though he by no means forgot about the newfound world of Fuinjutsu, settled down to read late into the night, becoming thoroughly engrossed in the book. The next day, when Kabuto fetched Naruto, he brought him to a room not unlike those that the two normally occupied for training purposes, except for the fact that low table occupied the center of the room and there were a few chairs pushed up against the walls. On the table were two wooden jointed mannequins, each no larger than 6 inches high. At Kabuto's instruction, Naruto got a chair and dragged it over to the table, sitting down and drawing the seat closer to the low table. "Now, did you read the passage I assigned you last night, Naruto?" Kabuto asked. Naruto nodded, neglecting to mention that he had read almost the entire book the night before, staying up until the early hours of the morning. To his surprise and pleasure, the reading had gone fairly quickly and he had barely had to refer to the lexicon at all. "Good," Kabuto said. He picked up the wooden mannequins, handing one to Naruto. "Can you guess what we'll be doing today?" Naruto shook his head, perplexed. "You said you would start teaching me clones and kawarimi and things," he said, trying to keep an accusatory, petulant note out of his voice. "And so I will, but not just yet. Later today I plan to start those things. You will continue your jutsu studies and physical training at the same time as you'll be doing this. No, what I'm trying to teach you is puppetry." "You know, these little things wouldn't do that much in a fight," Naruto commented dryly, holding up his own little mannequin. "That is of no significance presently," Kabuto said stiffly. "The point of these is to train you to form chakra threads and use them to manipulate a puppet. Once you have mastered that, we will move on to higher forms of puppetry." Naruto nodded, showing that he understood. "Can you form chakra threads and all that?" he asked. Kabuto pushed his glasses up higher on his nose. "I am able, certainly, though I am not a puppet master. However, my knowledge should be sufficient to teach you what you need to know." "All right then. What's first?" Kabuto began to describe to Naruto how to stretch small quantities of his chakra out until they were as long and thin as threads, though much stronger. He also indicated that these things, with experience, could be performed quickly enough that chakra strings could be shortened or lengthened as needed during battle. Finally, he demonstrated how to latch the chakra strings onto different segments of the mannequin's body and twitch and manipulate each string to make the mannequin walk and fight. It all seemed absurdly simple to Naruto, who had a suspicion that there was an awful lot Kabuto was leaving out of his explanation. "Is that it? Is that all there is to puppetry?" he asked when Kabuto had finished. "Of course not. This is no more than the surface, only the things you need to know to control that little wooden puppet. Once you've mastered that, I'll give you more information to accommodate teaching you the next step." "How many steps are there?" Naruto asked, watching as Kabuto put his own puppet through a complicated series of offensive and defensive moves, dodging and slashing and wheeling and blocking. "Enough to keep us going for some time," Kabuto said grimly. "To that end, I suggest you make a start. In a few hours, we'll put this to rest for now and I'll begin teaching you about clones." As Naruto had expected, forming the chakra threads in the way that Kabuto had described didn't prove especially challenging. Nor did attaching them to the various joints and segments of the mannequin. The part that gave him really trouble was coordinating the movements of his fingers with how he wanted the little puppet to move. He would often forget which finger controlled which body part or twitch the wrong finger by accident. It was boring, fiddly work and his mind wandered quite a lot as he tried to make the puppet obey his wishes. In the end, Kabuto seemed to see that Naruto wasn't going to make any more progress than he already had that day and called an early halt to the proceedings. Naruto helped the older boy push the table and chairs against the wall, leaving a larger space clear for clone making. Before they started anything, Kabuto, as was his custom, made Naruto recite to him all that he had learned about clones in the academy. After that, Kabuto stayed silent for a minute, thinking hard. As last, he spoke again. "Okay. Well, it seems like there's not much for me to teach you except to say that your chakra control seems to be where you were lacking the most in the academy. I'd suggest you try to make a clone the way you always did then so I can see how I need to help you." Naruto raised his hands and placed them together in a seal. "You want me to make 2 clones, like I always had to do in the academy?" he inquired. "No, I think one should be fine for now. Once you've got that, it will be easy to make multiple clones," Kabuto said decisively. Naruto shrugged. "Whatever you say, here goes, Bunshin no Jutsu." There was a puff of smoke. Naruto lowered his hands, waiting to see the result. He knew it would be better than what he had been able to produce in the academy, at least based on chakra control, if nothing else. What he did not expect was, when the smoke cleared, to see a pair of blue eyes at exactly his eye level, the smoke drifting through them, though they looked more solid than any illusion he had ever seen. Surrounding the eyes was his familiar face, whiskered, blonde-haired and healthy-looking. The clone was identical to him in every way, his height, his build, even wearing the same clothes as he wore the ones Kabuto had given him the day before and the same ninja sandals. Naruto walked around it, bemused, taking in every detail of the clone. He had expected it to be good, but not that good. It seems there's nothing for me to teach you. Naruto swiveled around to look at Kabuto. From his tone of voice, Naruto would have sworn he was grinning smugly, but by the time Naruto saw his face it was blank, wiped of expression. What now, then? What's next, Kourimi? Naruto asked, excited by the prospect of progress he could never have dreamed of back in the academy. Not that Iruka and Mizuki had been bad teachers. Iruka in particular had always been kind to Naruto, they just hadn't had the spare time to slow things down for him and give him the attention he needed. No, I think I'll save that for tomorrow, after you've had more practice with puppetry. Now, I think, is an appropriate time for you to work on your aim. A gleam of anticipation crept into his eye. And you're dodging. Naruto groaned. When Naruto finally returned to his room that night, limping a little, carrying a book on sealing that Kabuto had procured for him and swearing under his breath, it was to find a surprise. Apparently, while he had been getting his ass kicked by Kabuto during physical training, the older boy had requested that Naruto receive a desk and swiveling chair for his room. It was a bit small, but then, so was his room. On the desk was a ream of paper and a package of pens and pencils and a needed eraser. Dropping the book on his bed, Naruto headed over to investigate. On top of the paper there was a note from Kabuto reminding Naruto that he would be unable to perform jutsu or channel chakra into any seals he made while in his room. To express his feelings, Naruto crumpled up the paper and shoved it into a drawer of the desk. He wished he had the notes he had made during his first lesson with Kushina. He set to work, first scribbling down all the ideas he had had the day before, as well as a few new ones that came to him as he wrote. Then he took a new sheet and wrote down everything he could remember Kushina telling him about sealing, placing question marks after statements that he wasn't sure applied in only some circumstances or to all seals in general. When he was satisfied, he gathered up the papers he had written on and checked them over, reviewing the notes in his spiky, scrawling, though perfectly legible, handwriting. After that, he at last settled down on his bed, not longer aching from the thrashing Kabuto had given him, to peruse the book. Every once in a while he would get up and cross to his new desk, bringing the book with him, to copy something down or propose an experiment for future testing or write down a new idea. Once again, he didn't get to sleep until early the next morning. Kabuto removed his glasses, rubbing his prickling eyes. He wished that the next shift assigned to watch Naruto sleep might show some initiative and arrive on time for once. Why does Orochimaru-sama insist that we watch him around the clock, anyway? It's not like he knows enough to break out yet. I mean, not even his mother has a 24 guard, and she's Anbu level. Suddenly, Kabuto heard the creak of someone outside of the door and the scrape of a key in the lock of the observation room. About time, he thought grimly. He rose to leave, settling his glasses back into their usual resting place on the bridge of his nose as he did so. Oh no, don't leave on my account, Kabuto. Stay a while. Kabuto froze at the sound of that voice, instantly composing his face into a mask servility. He sat down once more, suppressing a sigh. Good evening, Orochimaru-sama, he said. The pale snake Sanin drew up the chair opposite Kabuto's, his amber, slit-pupiled eyes penetrating through the lenses of Kabuto's glasses and locking onto his tired black eyes, not giving permission for the younger man to back down or look away. Actually, Orochimaru said pleasantly, I believe it to be morning at this point. You really ought to get more rest, Kabuto. It doesn't do for a boy your age to stay up so late. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto said, while inside he cursed the old hypocrite. Orochimaru knew perfectly well that Kabuto would have spent all day with Naruto, and yet he went and assigned the silver-haired boy the early shift. Kabuto adjusted his glasses to hide his annoyance. To cut straight to the point, Kabuto, I have already read that report you submitted a few hours ago and wanted to come down here and hear the facts straight from you. You say the puppet master's DNA is already beginning to take effect? I believe that to be correct, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto said, leaning forward eagerly. Naruto showed considerable development in the areas of strategizing, literacy, planning, creativity, and the like. In addition, He grasped the concept of chakra strings and puppetry with a bare minimum of instruction from me and was able to create a perfect clone on the first try, where before that, Mizuki tells me, he could not even come close. In my opinion, all of these things are benefits of the puppet master's DNA, and, if you require it, I may even be able to prove it if I try plotting this increase in intelligence, competence, and proficiency from before the injection onwards. But here Orochimaru held up a hand and Kabuto fell silent. That will not be necessary, Kabuto, though I admire your enthusiasm. Your word is sufficient for me. Kabuto nodded, betraying no emotions. Why don't you tell me about Naruto's sealing instead? Orochimaru suggested. Much as we had predicted, the boy shows an instinctive grasp of sealing, Kabuto said. Well, he's got it on both sides, even without Sasori's DNA, Orochimaru pointed out. Please continue. Most of his ideas show innovation and insight such that when the time comes, I believe you will have no trouble applying his knowledge of seals to the creation of puppets, Kabuto said. Is that so? Excellent, Orochimaru said. Well, as usual, Kabuto, your progress with the boy seems perfectly satisfactory. Keep up the good work and all that and all. Yes? There was something else you wanted to say? Kabuto had cleared his throat meaningfully. As a matter of fact, there is, Orochimaru-sama. Well, spit out this, matter of fact, as I'm sure you'd like to get to bed soon. Kabuto spoke quickly but steadily, as though wanting to get the words out before he lost his nerve, important as they were. Not that I wish to question the advisability of teaching the boy sealing, he said, choosing his words carefully, but I feel it is my duty to remind you that in the course of his Fuinjutsu studies, it may be difficult to prevent Naruto from discovering the powers he gained from the DNA of the paper mistress. After all, neither he nor Kushina is yet aware of the experiments that are being performed on him, and inadvertent discovery could be troublesome, to say the least. You bring up a valid concern, Orochimaru admitted. However, I would not have put you in charge of this project if I did not believe you capable of dealing with things like this, Kabuto. I'll leave this matter in your hands. I'm sure you can come up with a way of dealing with it discreetly. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. 1 month ago, the day after Naruto's abduction. Sarutobi sat in his office. To any onlooker, it would seem that he was heavily ensconced in his paperwork, reading over the thick packet before him with attentive single-mindedness. But they would have been wrong. On that day, more than any other, Sarutobi's mind was even farther from the task at hand than usual. The day before, Iruka had informed him of Naruto's failure to perform the jutsu necessary to be declared a genin. Not that Sarutobi was altogether surprised, Naruto being 2 years younger than all of his classmates. Sometimes the Sandaime wondered if he had done the right thing in pushing Naruto into the academy so early. But these were not the things that distracted the old man from getting on with his workload this time. No, it was the fact that Naruto had not come to see him since before he left for the academy the day before. Sarutobi had a nagging feeling that something was amiss, a feeling he knew it would not be wise to ignore. However, he found it hard to justify taking time off to look for Naruto. The boy often went off on his own, occasionally disappearing for days at a time, and Sarutobi couldn't just take off after him every time. The only reason that Sarutobi could see that would make this absence more sinister than any other time was the fact that it directly followed what was no doubt a huge emotional blow for Naruto. Failing to achieve the required results to become a genin. Sarutobi sighed, rubbing his eyes with his forefinger and thumb. Why was he suddenly reminded of that time, 10 years ago, when Kushina had stormed into his office, demanding that he send a search party out to locate her son? There was a tactful knock at the door. Sarutobi all but jumped, but was almost immediately reassured. It can't be Kushina. That knock was far too polite for her. Come in, he called. It could be important, he reasoned. His paperwork could wait. The door was pushed open and someone slipped inside. Sarutobi, who had been expecting an ANBU, was slightly surprised, though he recovered his composure well. The man had dark eyes and mid-length silver hair, around which he tied black bandana with his Hite 8 attached to the front. Ah, Mizuki-san, Sarutobi greeted him. You wanted a word? Yes, Hokage-sama. Mizuki approached the desk, better to see the Sandaime over the piles of papers. It's about Naruto Uzumaki. Sarutobi sat up in his chair. His voice was tense and he gripped the edge of the desk. You have news of him, Mizuki-san. What has happened to Naruto? Merely that Kushina arrived in Konoha last night. She took Naruto with her, bidding me tell you that they were leaving, as she was displeased at Naruto's treatment at the hands of the villagers while he lived in Konoha. Sarutobi frowned a little. She left without coming to see me. Apparently so, Hokage-sama. She merely entrusted me with the message as I was the closest shinobi to her who was out on the streets at that hour. That doesn't sound like Kushina, Sarutobi mused. No, Hokage-sama. Well, if she was angry about how the villagers treated Naruto, I would have expected her to come bursting in here, complaining about it. Ah, yes. She thought you'd say that. She admitted that, given her own way, she would have come marching up here to perform deeds such as the type that would make the council slap a death sentence on her head. Your words, I presume? Mostly, Hokage-sama. I edited it somewhat for content. I wonder why she didn't come marching up here, though, Sarutobi persisted. One can only assume that she was concerned about her son's well-being in that scenario, Mizuki pointed out. In that case, where has the woman been for the last 10 years of Naruto's life? Did she say? Sarutobi asked indignantly. She did not, Hokage-sama, nor did she say where she was taking Naruto. However, she did say that she might get in contact with you at her earliest convenience. Or when she stopped being so angry. I may have a while to wait then, Sarutobi sighed. Ah well. Can't be helped, I suppose. At least I know that Naruto is safe. Yes, Hokage-sama. Well, if you'll excuse me Mizuki, as hard as I pray, this paperwork isn't going to do itself. Of course, Hokage-sama. Mizuki made his exit. Present day, Orochimaru's study. Orochimaru idly leafed through Naruto's file. Though the boy had only been staying in the labs for a little over a month, his file was already sizable, and Kabuto added new information and updates to it practically every day. I wasn't wrong when I called Kabuto enthusiastic, Orochimaru reflected. However, he also believed that he had been right to choose Kabuto to head the project. Despite his youth and relative inexperience, Kabuto was skilled, thorough, methodical. Just the kind of subordinate I could use more of around here, Orochimaru reflected. In fact, though he would never dream of enlightening Kabuto to the fact, Orochimaru was rather relieved that he had not had to sacrifice Kabuto to the DNA project. Doing so would have been something of a waste, in his opinion, not that it would have prevented him from going ahead and injecting Kabuto anyway. At least this way, if the Uzumaki boy is consistent in his resilience to the DNA, when I possess his body I will have someone competent at my right-hand side. Now, Orochimaru's thoughts turned to the Uzumaki boy himself. Under Kabuto's tutelage the boy was shaping up to be as powerful as, if not more so than, Kabuto himself. If it weren't for the fact that nobody had yet survived the experiment, Orochimaru may have even considered not possessing Naruto's body. With all that power, he might yet make the perfect, loyal subordinate. If it weren't for his troublesome Konohagakure morals, I would even have hoped that he would come around to my way of thinking in a few years. But no, it's better this way. He will gain the powers and serve me in the best way possible, by becoming my new skin. Orochimaru flipped through to the front of Naruto's file folder. There were the predictions that Kabuto had made at the beginning of the experiment. Of course, every time Orochimaru decided that it was time for Naruto to be given a new ability, he would have Kabuto write a whole new set of conjectures about how the new ability would interact with those Naruto had already been given. Kushina looked up at the scrape of the lock. It wasn't the time that someone usually came with food for her, so it must be Orochimaru, after something from her as ever. She got a surprise when a figure entered and it was not the snake Sanin, but the silver-haired boy, Kabuto. It had been a few days since she had seen him last, since she had given Naruto his first lesson on sealing. She treated him to the same silence she always gave Orochimaru when he came to see her and did not rise. After a moment, the boy sat down to be on her eye level. Hello, Uzumaki-san, Kabuto said coolly. Hello, bootlicking scum, Kushina responded, imitating Kabuto's cool, precise voice. To his credit, Kabuto seemed unfazed. You may be wondering why I'm down here, Uzumaki-san. Nothing of the sort, Kabuto. Kabuto blinked slowly, the only indication he gave that her familiarity was unwelcome. Ooh, you're good. Most of the other guards would be furious by now, Kushina said casually. I am not a guard, Uzumaki-san. You're right, you're too good to be a guard. You must be one of the higher-ups. One of the ones who kiss Orochimaru's ass directly, as opposed to through a low position in the hierarchy, Kushina said, smirking. You must feel fairly secure in your well-being, Uzumaki-san, as well as the well-being of your son. Kabuto gave a nasty smile. I take it you believe me now that he is your son? Maybe, maybe not, Kushina said, tilting her head first to one side, then the other. But, getting back to your other point, yeah, I think both of us are pretty secure. You wouldn't put a month of training into that kid just to kill him or risk damaging him in some unstable experiment. But what about you? Kabuto persisted, are you, perhaps, expendable? Oh I know I am, Kabuto. But at least for now, I'm pretty safe. You want me to teach Naruto, and at the rate of 1 or 2 lessons a week, I'd say I've got a few months before you realize I'm not going to teach him any secrets you could exploit. I figure then you'll probably just stop feeding me the antidote to the squatter poison in my system and let that do its work quickly and quietly, probably in some soundproof cell. Kushina spoke with remarkable nonchalance, as though she was discussing nothing more than the new price of shinobi weaponry. Kabuto pushed his glasses up higher on his nose and opened his mouth to speak, but Kushina swiftly cut him off. I'll bet you're lousy at poker. How do you figure? Kabuto asked, his train of thought momentarily derailed. The way you push your glasses up, I guessing that's your tell, Kushina said confidently. Kabuto gave a thin smile. I wouldn't know, Uzumaki-san, I don't gamble. Kushina snorted. I'll just bet you don't. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here, throwing your lot in with Orochimaru, would you? Why are you really here? Because I'd bet money it's not for the babysitting experience. And don't give me that whole, I am here to do exactly as my master requires, crap. Kabuto was silent for a moment. I can see how you achieved your Anbu status, Uzumaki-san, Kabuto said at last. Why thank you, Kabuto. Though you know, sucking up to sensei doesn't get you a better grade in my class. Whether you're here out of loyalty to Orochimaru or loyalty to someone else, you're still one of the old snake's lackeys, and, as such, will feel the full wrath of my scorching sarcasm. I expected nothing less of you, Uzumaki-san. Good boy. Now, why the hell are you slumming down here with the inmates? As fun as it is to trade insults with you, I bet you're going to be in trouble with the big man himself if you don't deliver some trifling message or warning or other, and, no offense, but the sooner you leave, the sooner I can back to trying to escape from these handcuffs. Kabuto made a mental note to post extra guards outside of Kushina's door. Shit. I'll bet he's just made a mental note to change my handcuffs or post more guards or something. Damn lackeys can't take a joke. Kabuto cleared his throat. As it happens, I just wanted to congratulate you. You seem to have lit quite the inspirational fire in your son. He seems completely obsessed with sealing now, to be frank. Well, what did he expect? If he's my son, he's a Namikaze on one side and an Uzumaki on the other. Sealing's in his blood, almost literally, thanks to the Kyuubi. Yes, quite. Kabuto stood, preparing to leave. Just do not forget your boundaries. If you take a single step out of line, both you and he will be punished. Ooh, a trifling message and a warning. I called it. Kushina saluted with her bound hands. Roger. Good. Kabuto opened the door, smiling at Kushina as he left. Have a pleasant rest of the day, Uzumaki-san. Good luck with those handcuffs. Over the course of the next few weeks, Naruto's abilities rapidly improved. When Kabuto taught Naruto Kawarimi, the blonde boy thoroughly annoyed the silver-haired one by using it and dodging most of his attacks during physical training. It got to such an extent that Kabuto was forced to ban Naruto from using it during training. I understand that you are proud that you achieved it, and I'm impressed that you can use it so often without feeling the drain, but it defeats the purpose of the training if you are not considering other options of blocking or dodging. What if you were almost out of chakra? What then? You have to train for that eventuality, Naruto. Whatever, you just want your human target back, Naruto said, earning himself a blow to the ribs. In addition to Kawarimi, Kabuto also taught Naruto Henge, with some mixed results. Kabuto was only halfway through his explanation of the jutsu when Naruto took it upon himself to test it. What he ended up with was not only a perfect Henge of Kabuto, but a perfect transformation, the difference being that Naruto's Henge was a solid clone of his sensei, rather than the illusion that most Henges really are. After discovering this, Kabuto made Naruto perform the transformation several times, just to make sure it wasn't a one-time thing and that Naruto could repeat it if need be. Then he made Naruto learn how to do it the right way. Naruto couldn't really find a place to apply this jutsu to his spars with Kabuto, although that didn't stop him trying. For a week or so after he learned the jutsu, Kabuto would occasionally find himself sparring with the third Hokage, himself, Mizuki, or a large bowl of ramen, respectively. Finally, he told Naruto to knock it off. Once Naruto knew all of the 3 basic jutsu, Kabuto set about teaching him to perform them seal less and smoke less, a task that took no more than a few weeks. Much harder were the puppetry studies that Naruto was undertaking at the same time. It took him quite some time to master the coordination needed to control the tiny mannequin, and privately thought that he would have even more difficulty once Kabuto started him using life-size battle puppets. However, he did eventually get the hang of it, and he spent several long hours practicing various taijutsu styles with it, just for Kabuto suggests that their mannequins fight it out, for fun. Naruto should have known better by then than to agree. As he was morbidly gathering up the pieces of his little wooden puppet, Kabuto seemed to take pity on him. Telling Naruto to leave the pieces, he led him over to a table on which there was a deep tray. Kabuto took hold of the tray and spread its contents out on the table. The things were various segments and joints of a wooden puppet larger than the ones Naruto and Kabuto had been using, perhaps 12 inches high when it was all in one piece. Kabuto instructed Naruto to refer to his knowledge of human anatomy and of puppets and put the mannequin back together. Sighing, Naruto set to work on the three-dimensional jigsaw. No sooner than he had completed it than Kabuto took it away, handing him another one of a similar size, though it was of different build and make, and instructing him to dismantle it and then reconstruct it. Naruto complied. Kabuto had left the room while Naruto completed his task. Though the older boy tried to hide it, Naruto could tell he was pleased when he returned to find Naruto practicing with the newly reconstructed mannequin, making it walk and fight. Enthusiastic though Naruto was in all areas of his studies, in no subject was he more attentive than Fuinjutsu. Naruto came to anticipate his time spent with Kushina-sensei, or Ka-sensei as he came to know her. Every time they met, he brought new ideas to run by her. She, in turn, suggested variations to consider and explained various concepts he could apply to all of his seals. In addition to this, she continued teaching him more common seals, always breaking them down first and teaching the basics and the components first, so that even after he learned the seal she was specifically teaching about he could apply the inner working to other projects. As of yet, Naruto had not completed any of the seals, preferring to develop all of them as far as he could before he got down to the relatively simple business of drawing up the seal. After several weeks, Naruto had learned to make not only exploding seals, but also how to make various vacuum seals. Kushina had also explained about summoning seals to him, bemoaning the fact that she had no summoning contract to show him. She also described a varied wealth of situations in which seals could be useful and how one seal could be changed with the tiniest of variations to be more efficient or more effective. As with all of the things Kushina told Naruto, he seemed to immediately grasp the concept of different variations of the same type of seal and began adding subtypes to all of his ideas, variables that could be exploited and variables that should be dealt with to make the seal design sleeker and more foolproof. After those several weeks, Naruto was sitting at his desk in his room during one of his few days off, copying down a diagram from the book he was holding open with his left hand. There was a tap at the door. "Come in, Kabuto," Naruto said, not looking up. Kabuto entered, a rueful smile on his face. "Busy?" he asked. Naruto nodded, carefully laying his pencil down in the crease between the open pages of his book to keep his place. With one last lingering look at his copied diagram, he swiveled around in his chair. "What do you need?" he asked. "How about this?" Kabuto asked, holding the door open wider. "I won't ask the obvious, how did you know it was me at the door? Question, and you come with me to take another vitamin supplement?" Naruto smirked, standing and crossing to the door in a few strides. "I knew it was you because no one else comes to visit me here," he explained. Kabuto locked the door as they left, before leading Naruto down the hallway, toward the labs. "I know. That's why I didn't ask." Once Kabuto had finished checking Naruto's restraints, he glanced up and caught sight of a blurred shape in the mirror. Predictably, when he turned, he saw Orochimaru standing with his back to the room, preparing something on counter by the wall. "Are we ready to proceed, Orochimaru-sama?" Kabuto asked respectfully. "Not quite yet." Orochimaru turned to face Kabuto, taking a few steps forward to bring him level with the table on which Naruto laid. Kabuto noticed that Orochimaru held a vial, and put out a hand automatically to receive it. However, Orochimaru drew it back out of his reach. Kabuto dropped his hand to his side and raised an eyebrow inquisitively. "Not just yet, Kabuto. Before you begin, I want your opinion on several matters." "My opinion reflects my master's will, Orochimaru-sama," Kabuto said without hesitation. "As is to be expected." Orochimaru smirked. "Perhaps I ought to make myself more clear. I want the benefit of your expertise on a matter. I want you to honestly tell me if certain tests I seek to run would be advisable." "What would these tests entail?" Kabuto pushed his glasses up, meeting his master's golden eyes. In answer, Orochimaru transferred the vial he was holding to his other hand, fished in his pocket for a moment, then drew out 2 more vials. "These would throw off your predictions, but other than that, can I safely give them to the boy? What is your opinion?" Kabuto opened his mouth and Orochimaru quickly added, succinctly, "Kabuto." "Naturally, Orochimaru-sama. May I see the vials?" Orochimaru handed them over and Kabuto focused on one, turning it in his hands so he could read the label. After a minute, he met Orochimaru's eyes. This is DNA from Jugo, the shapeshifter, isn't it? Orochimaru made a motion for him to go on. You are considering adding this to Naruto's experimental procedures? Would you advise it? Orochimaru shot back. Do you think he would benefit? Certainly he would benefit, with Jugo's unique abilities, Kabuto said slowly, but I still do not think it advisable. Our researchers have no idea to what extent Jugo's unstable personality is DNA coded. You could risk transferring the same behavioral patterns to Naruto, which would, in turn, be transferred to you when you take control of Naruto's body. However, am I correct in thinking that you are perfecting a transferable version of Jugo's powers? If that is the case, once you discover a safe way to transfer these powers, that method could easily be applied to Naruto, perhaps with no ill ramifications. I see. Orochimaru took the vial back, pocketing it. And what of the other sample? Kabuto lifted the other vial so he could read the label, and, a minute later, he shot Orochimaru a look tinged with alarm. I take it you don't recommend this one, either, Orochimaru said dryly. That is so, Orochimaru-sama. This is DNA from the Kagaya boy. The one, I take it, who is currently having to increase his medicinal intake dosage practically weekly. Your point, Kabuto? My point is that not only is his disease in all likelihood fatal, but its origin is completely unknown to us. The medication has little effect, and it would not be prudent to risk transferring the disease to a valuable test subject. You do not think the Kyuubi would prevent the disease from taking effect? I do not think we ought to take the risk that once the Kyuubi is extracted, the disease will not take effect. I see, Orochimaru said again. Is that all, Orochimaru-sama? Not quite. There's still the matter of the boy's infusion. Ah, of course. And which sample will he be receiving? Orochimaru slipped the sample of Kimimura's DNA into his pocket, withdrawing the first vial once more and passing it to Kabuto, explaining, this is a compound that contains genetic material salvaged from the scales of Samahata. Your predictions about both the powers it would give the boy and how it would affect him physically were rather vague. Kabuto whitened. Surely you are not suggesting that we give him that now. Orochimaru's smile dropped abruptly and he narrowed his eyes. Kabuto seemed to realize his mistake, as he swallowed and bent his head, breaking eye contact to regard the floor. Know your place, Kabuto, Orochimaru said coldly, and do not presume to question me. If you are concerned about hiding the changes from the boy, I'd advise you to keep him sedated until you have a course of action in that regard. Otherwise, the boy's training is to resume as usual once he wakes up. Keep him practicing seals and puppetry, but as for jutsu, there will be no need to teach him more than advanced control exercises and the basic 3. If you have promised to teach him anything, do not disappoint, keep up your act, but begin to focus more on the boy's physical training. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru considered Kabuto's still inclined head. Do not disappoint me, Kabuto. My patience where the boy is concerned is all but non-existent. You would do well not to try it. No more than I would expect, Orochimaru-sama. Kabuto winced as he felt a brief rush of air, heard the slam of the door that led to the hallway. He straightened up, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand and pushing up his glasses with the other. After a moment of staring at the door, unseeing, gathering his thoughts, he turned toward where Naruto lay on the table. Slowly, deliberately, he began to hook the younger boy up to all of the various monitors and meters that he had become accustomed to checking during these brief spells of Naruto's unconsciousness. When he was finished, he administered another shot of sedative the Kyuubi would ensure it didn't kill the blonde, and Kabuto really didn't want the boy waking up now, not after all of their secrecy in these matters. Then, holding his right hand steady with his left, he injected Naruto with the infusion. And sat down to wait, and observe. Barely 10 minutes after administering the compound, Kabuto noticed something. A definite darkening of the veins around Naruto's right forearm, where he had injected the fluid. Though the prick mark had healed the instant the needle had been removed, the darkness spread. By the time 20 minutes had passed since initial injection, all of the veins in Naruto's right arm from wrist to shoulder were swollen, pressing against his skin, purple-black and pulsing. Over the next hour, there was nothing Kabuto could do but watch helplessly as the dark veins claimed more of Naruto's body, spreading down around his chest, right shoulder blade, ribs, and even curling around his and lower back. It was half an hour after Kabuto gloomily noted the veins were visible clearly around Naruto's right hip that it happened. The darkened veins had been spreading slowly across Naruto's face, and had long since formed thick, ropey masses centering on his eyes. Kabuto reached out a hand and gently turned Naruto's head to see the veins creeping around the back of his head, disappearing under his hair. Kabuto just barely noted the dark mass that had settled over the base of the blonde boy's skull, before he felt a tingling sensation in his fingertips. Hastily, he whipped his hand back, flexing his fingers and rubbing life back into them. It didn't seem that much damage had been done. In fact, it merely felt as though the fingers that had been touching Naruto's head had fallen asleep. The blood paused in its circulation. He drained the chakra in my fingers. Kabuto leaned over Naruto, and as his shadow fell over the boy, blocking the fluorescent light from his face, Naruto's eyes flew open. Kabuto backed up hastily at the sight of those eyes. They were the same cloudy purple-black as the malignant veins that mapped out most of Naruto's body, pupil, sclera, and all. Naruto stared unseeingly at the ceiling, and for a moment, it seemed that he was straining every muscle in his body, fighting against the restraints. Then he slumped, his eyes half closing. Kabuto watched as the darkness drained from those eyes, receding and leaving the eyes their normal bright blue. The silver-haired boy could not help but sigh in relief as the blackness began to dissipate from Naruto's veins. The process took far less time than it had taken for the darkness to spread in the first place, and 20 minutes later, there was almost no trace that Naruto's appearance had ever changed. Kabuto, satisfied, was on the point of unstrapping the boy and unhooking him from the monitors, when, on impulse, he decided to test a hunch of his. Surrounding his hand in the familiar green glow of a healing jutsu, he lowered his hand toward Naruto's right arm. The response was immediate. Tiny, gray-blue scales pushed through the skin beneath Kabuto's hand, eagerly expanding and contracting as they absorbed Kabuto's jutsu. As Kabuto brought his hand away, noting that not even the smallest amount of chakra remained from his jutsu, he was in time to study the small scales properly. They were thicker and wider than a snake's scales, bearing sharp-looking edges. Though they held a similar overlapping pattern to snake scales, they did not quite lie flat. No sooner than he had assessed this much, however, the scales withdrew, leaving behind little slits in the skin that were instantly healed, no doubt through Kyuubi-induced methods. Kabuto let out a long breath, running both hands over his face, hard, pushing his glasses up onto his forehead as he did so. This would require many more tests and, if the time when Naruto had been given Konan's DNA was any indicator, buckets of sedative. After nearly half a week of tests, of frantically scribbling notes, of letting sleep take a backseat to keeping Naruto in his drug-induced state, Kabuto was just about ready to hand this assignment over to someone else. Through methodical trial and error, Kabuto had discovered a number of useful facts about Naruto's new abilities. For one thing, range did not appear to be a factor. Jutsu used around Naruto remained intact, at least unless they got too close. The scales did not manifest until jutsu that were directed at Naruto were less than 5 inches from his skin, at which point they would spring forth and absorb the incoming jutsu, or rather, they would unravel the incoming jutsu and transfer it into pure chakra and absorb that in less than a second. This applied to elemental jutsu as well, absorbing the innate natural chakra from the attacks and leaving the elements themselves untouched. After those tests, Kabuto could generally be found brushing ordinary dirt off of his test subject. For another thing, the scales would appear only on the area of skin that would have been affected by whatever jutsu was headed Naruto's way and nowhere else, and did so consistently without conscious direction from the sleeping boy. Kabuto also learned that the scales would only absorb chakra from jutsu directed at Naruto. Genjutsu or kawarimas were in no way affected by the absorption, even when used within the 5 inches of the unconscious boy's skin or on Naruto himself. On a similar note, when Kabuto laid his hand on Naruto's arm, concentrating on not channeling any chakra at all, he found that the scales did not appear to begin sucking away at his inactive reserves. When he began to channel unformed chakra in a manner similar to what was required for a leaf-floating exercise, however, that chakra was instantly absorbed. In addition to these discoveries, Kabuto found that the scales themselves did not provide a layer of armor thick enough to protect from any attacks that were purely physical. When cut apart with a kunai, smashed, removed, chipped, or damaged by ordinary fire, that is to say that the flames which contained no chakra, or damaged in any other way Kabuto cared to test, the scales regrew whole within seconds, but did nothing to stop the physical attacks from reaching Naruto's skin beneath. On the 4th day of testing, Kabuto made one other discovery that caused him to swear loudly. He was testing the extent of the scale coverage on Naruto's body by forming a chakra scalpel around his hand and gently moving it across Naruto's skin, watching in fascination as tiny waves of blue-gray scale sprang up to drag at the chakra he was putting out, before disappearing as the jutsu passed them over. Kabuto had tested Naruto's entire right half, face, arms, back, and chest before he ran into any complications. As soon as the scalpel traveled down to the left side of Naruto's ribs, blood suddenly bloomed under the edge of the translucent green blade. Kabuto immediately withdrew his hand, waiting for the damage to heal, which it did within seconds. Kabuto switched the jutsu around his hand to the benign glow of a healing jutsu. He ran this over the left half of Naruto's ribcage, growing worried when no scales made an appearance, particularly when he moved his hand to Naruto's right side once more and the scales sprang up instantly and he felt the familiar drain on his jutsu. Moving his hand back to Naruto's left half, the drain disappeared, as did the scales. What could have caused the spread to be incomplete? Kabuto wondered, frantically racking his brains. Suddenly, he remembered the dark veins from the day that Naruto had received the transfusion in the first place. The veins never spread entirely to his left half, Kabuto realized. Quickly, using the medical jutsu still pulsing around his fingers, he tested his theory. Indeed, though Naruto's entire back, head, arms, chest, and right half reacted to the jutsu with tiny waves of scales, Naruto's lower ribcage on the left side and his entire left leg and hip did not react at all. Finally, Kabuto let the jutsu fade, slumping in a chair by the high table. Glancing at the monitors to reassure himself that Naruto was still sedated, Kabuto leaned forward with a groan, his head in his hands. It's not as bad as it could be, he reassured himself. He could have died from that transfer. The liquid could have rejected Naruto's chakra strain, particularly with all of the foreign substances that are in it at this point, and he could have died. Instead, he lives. This was perfectly true. But how will I keep these new powers from Naruto? Presumably the scales will not interfere with his own jutsu, so I suppose I'll just have to revert to using pure taijutsu against him in our spars in future. Kabuto's expression turned thoughtful. Kushina most likely won't notice the change or remark on Naruto's absence, seeing as she only sees him once or twice a week, and the dates are never fixed or regular. With any luck, she won't notice the scales, either, as I doubt she'd use a jutsu against her own son. Perhaps I ought to reinforce that point with her. Kushina had plenty of time to affix a smirk to her face as Kabuto made his way into her cell. Once more, he sat down before her, his back resting against the door. "Sup, string bean?" she asked, before he had a chance to speak. Kabuto smiled coldly. "Just business, I'm afraid." "Ah, Kabuto," Kushina whined. "How many times do I have to tell you? If you decide you want anything that isn't strictly business, don't contact me. I'm not going to pay you for that stuff." Kabuto's expression was slightly bored as he continued. "One of our useful spies in Konoha reports that the Hokage, while never having been worried in the past about your disappearance all those years ago, is getting suspicious that he has not received a letter from you yet." Kushina's eyes narrowed. She couldn't help it. "What lies are you feeding Sarutobi-sama?" she snarled. "The Hokage is under the impression that you finally tracked Naruto down after all of these years and immediately brought him away from Konoha, not stopping first to visit Hokage-sama." Kabuto shook his head mockingly. "How impolite. What do you want with me, then? You are going to write your friend Sarutobi a letter, in which you will tell him that you and Naruto are safe and together." "And why would I do that?" "Because if you do not, we will hurt Naruto," Kabuto said simply. "And if you attempt to write in code, or you write something I do not find suitable, you will start again, and will not receive your antidote until you have finished. Wouldn't it be a shame if Naruto became an orphan? What would we tell him? After all, he already thinks he is one. But to lose his Ka-sensei." "Okay. Letter, got it. Anything else, scumbag?" Kushina growled. "As a matter of fact, yes." Kabuto resisted the impulse to push up his glasses. Kushina smirked, and Kabuto knew that she had seen his hand twitch and guessed his thought process. "Well, you are on no account to use any jutsu on or against Naruto." Kushina's lip curled. "I gotta say, Kabuto, that's pretty low, even for you. Was there a doubt that I wouldn't use jutsu against a harmless kid? Because if there was, I'd just love to know the reason for it. Is he dangerous or unstable? Shouldn't you be telling me these things?" This time, Kabuto really did push his glasses farther up his nose. It gave him time to consider the phrasing of his answer. "Of course there is nothing wrong with your son. We're taking excellent care of him. Which certainly puts my mind at rest, you can be sure." Kabuto smiled coldly. "Stick to writing your letters to Hokage-sama and let the rest of us worry about our jobs." Kushina snorted. "Jobs? That's a bit of an overstatement. From all I've observed, you're just Orochimaru's bitch, doing his dirty work and delivering his warnings. And yet, I can leave, while the more cynical of the two of us will have to remain here, power dampened." Kabuto stood and turned his back on Kushina, placing a hand on the doorknob. From behind him, Kushina spoke up once more. "I'd be careful if I were you. Not that I give a shit what happens to you in here, but don't be so quick to assume you'll be able to just walk out on the service of the old snake. Kabuto stood, indecisive. Should he answer? Without turning around, he said quietly, "That's the second time you've said something in that vein. Do you know something I don't?" "Only what happened to me." Kabuto heard the rattle of chains and allowed his eyes to fall closed briefly. He left without looking at the red-haired woman. For the third time since he had arrived at the labs, Naruto opened his eyes to see the now familiar surroundings of his bedroom with no memory of the previous days. He sat up, tense, running his fingers through his spiky hair. "Hey, Kabuto," he said tentatively. Less than a minute later, the silver-haired boy appeared holding a stack of books, pushing open the door to peer down at Naruto, still perched on the edge of his bed, cradling his head in his hands. An ice-cold sliver of panic wriggled into Kabuto's heart at the sight. "Did Naruto suspect? You called?" he said tentatively. Naruto dropped his hands into his lap and turned his head to face the older boy, frowning. "Kabuto, why is it that when you take me away for these vitamins, I always wake up in my bed with this big gap in my memory?" Kabuto, seeking to hide the fact that his mind was in a whirling panic, stepped fully into the room, allowing the door to swing closed behind him. "Ah, I see that I must have forgotten to inform you. You see, the vitamins you are taking have a slight anesthetic mixed in, just as a fail-safe for any unexpected side effects, which ends up putting you to sleep and, I assume, affecting your memory." "I don't like that it's messing with my memory," Naruto said, a low growl in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me that would happen?" "I didn't tell you it would because usually it doesn't. It only affects certain patients the way it does you, and I had no idea it would do that to you," Kabuto invented, keeping his blank, clinical facade up. "Can't you find a way to give me the vitamins but not the memory loss?" Naruto asked. Kabuto resisted the urge to sag with relief. "I'll see what I can come up with, but I'll make no promises." "All right, then." Naruto stood, waited for Kabuto to leave, then followed the older boy out into the hallway. "So, what's on today's agenda?" "Take a guess." Kabuto led Naruto through the compound and into one of their usual training rooms. On one of the tables in the room were a few large crates and sheets of paper. Without waiting to be asked, Naruto moved to investigate the crates. Removing the lids, he peered inside, before pulling out a piece of wood roughly a foot long. It had a joint partway down its length, allowing it to bend in one direction. Naruto examined the piece for a moment, turning it around and testing the joint. Finally, he glanced up at Kabuto. "Puppet arm?" he asked. Kabuto nodded affirmation. Naruto weighed the piece in his hands, frowning. "It's pretty heavy to be part of Battle Puppet. I'm guessing there aren't any hidden compartments, which would make it lighter as well as make good places to put weapons, either for storage or so the puppet could wield them." "Very good," Kabuto said, giving a rare smile. "You're right, no one is going to be using the pieces of this puppet to fight. They're only here to help you with the next project I want you to work on." "And what's that?" "I want you to take a good look at all of these puppet pieces and design 3 different puppets using only these parts. For now, design only how the pieces would be constructed, not how the puppet would be augmented. I want you to make 2 of the designs humanoid and the last one abstract or animal-like, using the same pieces." Naruto nodded, placing the crates on a different table and beginning to unload parts from them. "Am I allowed to assume, in my designs, that I can dismantle pieces where they have joints?" "For the abstract design and one of the humanoid ones, yes. However, I would like you to construct one of the humanoid designs on the understanding that you cannot alter the pieces here. However, joints are no problem, so you may plan to use hinge joints as ball and socket joints instead, if you prefer. Just remember when you are drawing up your designs, these puppets will be meant for battle, so plan accordingly." Naruto nodded, not looking up from where he was arranging the wooden parts, and Kabuto wondered if Naruto was even listening to him. Kabuto shrugged internally. The boy looked like he knew what he was doing. So Kabuto took a chair from one of the tables in the room and dragged it toward the wall. He sat, pulling his knees up until he could cross his legs in the seat of the chair, and turned to the small pile of books he had brought. They were to be Naruto's next reading assignments, but Kabuto wanted to skim through them again before he gave them to the boy. It was no more than an hour later that Naruto showed Kabuto his sketches. There were notes all over the margins, showing how pieces would slot together, and showing different angles of the puppets, which Kabuto had forgotten to tell Naruto to do. He's really benefiting from Sasori's IQ, despite how young he is. "Very good," Kabuto said, and Naruto beamed at the praise. "Now, I want you to apply seals to these. Take into account how large the seals would be, how visible, what they would be crafted of, their purposes, etc. Try to include some that are not primarily battle-oriented. In addition, I want you to outfit the puppets with weapons. That should require you to make a decision as to what type of fighter the particular puppet would specialize in being used by and against. If possible, plan how to alter these 3 designs so that they look essentially the same on the outside as you've planned them already, but have a very different function. Naruto scratched the back of his head, frowning. That'll take a while to plan. Take all the time you need. Kabuto settled down with his books once more, giving the impression that the discussion was over and that Naruto was to get started. The next time Kushina saw Naruto, he was full of questions and proposals. From what Naruto was telling her about these puppets Kabuto had him designing, Kushina's job at this point seemed to be to answer Naruto's questions and show him how to design seals to achieve the effects he was talking about. Kushina refused to do the work for him, though. Instead, she continued teaching him the steps, techniques, and components he would need to come up with the solutions on his own. By doing this and by asking just the right questions, Kushina succeeded in getting Naruto to design entire sets of seals, including ones that had nothing to do with the purposes he seemed to have had in mind in the first place. Kushina noticed that, while Naruto wrote down every one of his ideas, often in shorthand, so they were incomprehensible to any but him, Naruto never completed a single original design. Not once did she see the boy draw out a final version of any of the seals he was designing. When asked about it, Naruto waved the question away, explaining that he was much more concerned about the ideas themselves than the physical designs, which, he claimed, wouldn't take long to draw up anyway. Kushina couldn't help but agree with him on that point. From the moment Kushina had told Naruto that it was possible to refine seal designs so that less strokes were required, making them faster and easier to draw, Naruto had begun applying this principle to nearly all of his designs, testing just how much he could modify and simplify standard designs of basic seals before their effects began to vary. All in all, Naruto was beginning to think of seals in terms of how efficient he could make them, a principle that seemed odd considering how seemingly useless some of his seals were. The entire time, Kushina was sneaking looks at Naruto as he worked. He didn't seem any different than he had been before, and yet she could not forget Kabuto's words. Surely Orochimaru wanted more with Naruto than just benefit from his sealing skills. The sooner I get the 2 of us out of here, the better. Though Kushina was fast falling into the loose routine of writing letters to the Hokage, always with their content dictated to her by Kabuto or one of the old snake's other lackeys, she did not hold out hope that she could, through these missives, expect help from Konan. The letters were always very carefully read over, and if even one phrase fell wrongly on Kabuto's ears, the entire thing would have to be rewritten. How Kushina hated servitude. Kabuto, intending to follow Orochimaru's instructions regarding Naruto's physical training, was temporarily taken aback when Naruto approached him with an idea in that vein before Kabuto had so much as broached the subject. "Wisey, I have this seal I want to try out. I think it would really help both my physical and sealing training. So, what do you say?" Naruto smiled nervously. Kabuto frowned a little. "A forbidding sight. What exactly is the intended effect of this seal you are proposing?" "It's a weight seal, like the training seals they mentioned in one of the books you gave me, but much less clunky and more easily adjustable." Now Kabuto looked slightly bemused. He was already aware that when he gave Naruto passages to read, more often than not the younger boy ended up reading the entire book or section, but this, you remember a passing mention of training weights in one of the books I gave you? After you read it only once? Well, yes. Naruto shifted from foot to foot. So, what do you think? By all means, if you have designed a seal that acts similarly to these training weights, who am I to stop you? Though I do have one suggestion and a rule. Oh yeah? Yes. My suggestion is that you test this seal first on another object, and then by writing it on your skin in ink before you go ahead and inscribe it permanently. Make sure you can draw it competently with both hands, or ask me if you need help. I suppose Kushina would be better at this, but I cannot risk her trying to turn this to her advantage. And what's the rule you mentioned? Naruto asked, some apprehension still clear on his face. Kabuto made a mental note to give Naruto a book on body language and another on masking one's emotions. The rule is that only I shall be allowed to set the weights of these seals. I am something of a medical specialist, and I don't want you to accidentally overtax your muscles. That could prove far more damaging than beneficial. Even though the Kyuubi will probably make this procedure much faster and effective than it would be on the average shinobi. I understand. Naruto scampered off to begin his designs. Orochimaru laid down the report with a sigh. Really, he would have to remind Kabuto that not every note the silver-haired boy made during these procedures was necessary for Orochimaru to personally view. The boy had written positive reams. And while the scientist side of Orochimaru approved, and even encouraged, the thorough reports, he was still slightly resentful that such detail showed that he was expected to personally read every word. He was not pleased at what Kabuto had to tell him, anyway. From what he could gather from Kabuto's highly verbose report, Samahata's abilities had not spread completely to all parts of his new skin. He was hesitant to order that the boy be injected once more with the same strain, unless the double dose proved too difficult for the Kyuubi to counterbalance. Orochimaru caught himself sincerely hoping that the scales did not choose to permanently manifest once the Kyuubi was extracted. So much for the perfect host. The best that could happen is that the scale coverage could extend during the next year and a half to cover the boy's body entirely. Orochimaru stood, surveying where he had pinned up his designs for the project he had been dubbing the Cursed Seal. It was something as a joke, as he had come up with the name in a fit of frustration when the project had seemed to be going badly some weeks ago. However, his lab assistants had immediately adopted the name, believing it alluded to the fact that almost every test subject to whom the seal had been applied thus far had died, and the Snake Sanin had not bothered to correct this conception. Thankfully, the project was going much more smoothly now, and a new batch of test subjects was expected within a few days. Once they were briefed and primed, the seal could once again be tested. Orochimaru idly wondered how he could apply it this time. Branding, in his opinion, was far too messy a process, and had, anyway, yielded poor results. Perhaps a method more in keeping with his innate, snake-like tendencies was in order. How Orochimaru wished he could pick Kushina's brains on the subject. In fact, once or twice, he had even attempted to do just that, but was rewarded only with insolence and aspersions cast on his sexual orientation. As if he had the time to spare for such thoughts. Frustration overcame the Snake Sanin once more. He wished that, when he had asked Kabuto about the possibility of giving the boy the Kaguya's DNA, Kabuto had returned a different answer. Such a waste to let such a useful talent slip through his fingers. His only consolation was that the Kaguya boy remained completely loyal to him. Even if the boy were to make a miraculous recovery after Orochimaru had already assumed control of Naruto's body, there was no way that Kimamero's talents would fall into the hands of those pompous fools back in Konoha. Turning his back on the plans for his cursed seal, Orochimaru retrieved Kabuto's predictions once more, perusing them as he had done so often already. Kabuto claims that neither the boy nor his mother yet has any idea of the experiments. However, I have so far given the boy only the samples the effects of which are most easily hidden. Based on these predictions, it will be much more difficult to keep up the charade from here on out. And so Orochimaru reached a decision. I shall wait to give the boy another sample. Instead of spacing them out evenly over 2 years as I had intended, I will instruct Kabuto to implement a more strict training regime for the next few months, after which I will have the boy receive the last few samples within the same 4 or 5 month period. Orochimaru cast his eyes over the predictions, and when it does come time for his next infusion, I think this one is the only logical choice. Naruto sat up straight, the wall behind him supporting his back. Kabuto sat perpendicular to Naruto, slightly to one side of the boy, his eyes flickering from Naruto's still form to the larger form at the other end of the room. This was Naruto's new challenge, and Kabuto was determined to see the younger boy through it. The puppet twitched as Kabuto watched. He flicked his eyes back to Naruto, whose face was entirely blank, no hint of exertion or emotion to be seen. Slowly, the puppet went through a series of taijutsu stances. Then again, slightly faster. And again. Each time the routine was repeated, Naruto picked up the pace a little until the wooden construct was a whirling picture of formidable opposition. And still Naruto betrayed no emotion, no movement, not even the tiniest flick of his fingers. Kabuto smirked, withdrawing a kunai and approaching, remembering as he did so the instructions that he had given Naruto several weeks ago when they had begun these exercises. Now, Naruto, you remember, I hope, what we have discussed about energy. What about it? Naruto asked absently, hunched over in his chair and minutely examining the tiny puppet he was marking up, figuring the best places to put seals. How energy in a human's body can be converted to kinetic energy or chakra? Kabuto prompted. What about heat and sound? Those are forms of energy, too. Yes, that is true. However, for purposes of this discussion, I think I can say that it is safe to disregard them. I thought it was never safe to disregard information, despite how seemingly trivial. After all, heat and sound are very obvious forms of energy that can blow your cover if you're not careful. I concede. Those are excellent points. Kabuto admitted, voice devoid of the biting resentment he felt at having his own lectures quoted back to him. I learned from the best. Naruto finally set down the doll-sized puppet and turned to properly face the older boy. So, what about energy did you want to say? Just a word on your puppet manipulation. Now, You know that in a real battle situation a puppet is a long-range weapon meant to keep your enemy away from your body while you control the puppet, yes? Yeah, I know. However, it doesn't always work that way, particularly if you are fighting multiple opponents with one puppet. In that case, it is often hard to engage in a close-range fight and maintain puppet manipulation simultaneously. Which is why you have to work on conserving your energy. Naruto heaved an unhappy sigh. I thought you said I was good on conserving chakra. Correction. I said your chakra control was adequate for the time being. The truth was, Naruto's chakra control, augmented by that in Sasori's genes, was slightly above average for one his age, quite a feat for someone with Naruto's capacity. Well, then, I want you to work on preserving not just your chakra, but also your body's other energy. Any particular way you want me to go about doing that? Kabuto pushed up his glasses, hiding his eye roll. Really, Naruto could be kind of a brat. He was getting training like most academy students could only dream of. It wasn't like he knew that it came with a price higher than almost any would be willing to pay. Yes, in fact. I want you to take control of one of the larger puppets you've made and make it move without moving your body. At all. You must control and move it only by manipulating it with chakra strings. This way, you will only use exactly as much chakra as is needed and will expend no extra energy. Naruto frowned. That sounds counterproductive. In what way does that sound at all counterproductive? Kabuto asked, keeping his annoyance from bleeding into his voice. I'd be learning to not move while moving the puppet. I thought it was better to be mobile than to be a sitting duck. One step at a time, Naruto. This will teach you to use energy efficiently, have better control over your puppet, and allow you to eventually focus on moving your body separately of how you manipulate your puppet. Oh, okay then. It was now several months removed from when Naruto had received the previous DNA sample, and since then Kabuto had been focusing on Naruto's physical training, exposing him to a wide variety of taijutsu styles and battle scenarios. Always he stressed how Naruto, not yet even a qualified genin, would be at a disadvantage in almost any fight he would be drawn into and had to plan for every eventuality. In the meantime, Naruto was up to the third setting of his weight seals, although Kabuto had him turn off the effects of the seals a few times a week so that his fighting styles did not develop a dependency on them. In addition, Kabuto had cautioned Naruto once more against raising the settings too soon, lest he overtax himself. Naruto had considered these concerns to be unnecessary, as he himself knew just how fast his body healed from even major injuries. For lack of anything better to start on, Kabuto had begun teaching Naruto a few minor genjutsu. These did not grab Naruto's imagination nearly as thoroughly as Fuinjutsu had, but he was still sufficiently fascinated to ask Kushina and Kabuto question after question, ranging from the dispelling of genjutsu to the creation and maintenance of a three-dimensional illusion scenario. He was curious whether one could dispel a genjutsu without alerting the caster to the fact that one had done so and whether one could set up a permanent genjutsu, affecting someone's perception of a certain object or person, for example. Naruto was still receiving instruction from Kushina on seals, and though he usually stuck to that topic when in her presence, the two did not restrict their conversations, discussing techniques and new ideas in a variety of areas. As Naruto had not received a new DNA infusion for quite some time, Kabuto had begun giving Naruto sugar pills periodically for the sake of appearances. The boy had been pleased to report that he wasn't forgetting things after each dose, as he had been before. Kabuto wondered how Naruto would feel about the new holes in his memory when Kabuto was invariably instructed to continue the ongoing experiment. Oh well, he would just have to cross those bridges when he came to them. Kushina quickly schooled her expression as his cell door opened. If it isn't my favorite little tyrant, she snarked. I was missing the dulcet tones of your bitch-ass whining. What's up? Kabuto raised an eyebrow. For once, this visit might be considered by some, in the very loosest sense of the words of course, a social call. Only if those some are blind, deaf, and comatose, Kabuto, Kushina said in an annoyingly knowing voice, as you are not being the least bit social at all. Kabuto pouted mockingly, don't you like me at all, Kushina-sama? Kushina stared at Kabuto hard for a second, and then slowly shook her head. Wow, you sounded uncannily like a certain snake in the grass right there, she said grimly. You're young, you've got your life ahead of you. Don't fuck up your chances by letting that creep rub off on you. Kabuto sighed. As usual, I require neither your sympathy nor your guidance, and yet you give it so freely. Are you actually so concerned for my well-being? Believe it or not, Kabuto, yes, I am. Kabuto pushed up his glasses. Excuse me? You see, Kabuto, I once had a son. Oh, he was much younger than you are, but I had to watch as he was taken away to endure a fate that I knew would be little better than torture. I knew what was in store for him. I had experienced the same thing. And yet I let it be done to him, to my own child. I know lives were saved because of it, but that almost makes it worse, because it gives the action justification and means that I didn't try to search for an alternative. What does this have to do with your inexplicably wishing me not to come to harm? I just don't want you to throw away what you have for the sake of what you think the easy thing is. In my experience, taking the morally correct path tends to lead to less rewards than does the path of instant gratification. Really, that surprises me. I would have thought you were one of those wait until the right moment and then do what is needed guys. You're not far off. I'm more like one of those wait until the opportunity presents itself and then take it guys. So you're not backing down, not unless you do the same. Kushina snorted. You impress me less every time we speak. Interesting how you can say that without really knowing anything about me. Didn't you spend your entire life dealing with those imbeciles who judged and spoke before deigning to gather information? It's not the same, isn't it? Kabuto stared at her. It was the closest she had ever seen the silver-haired teen come to a glare. At least Naruto is happier here than he was in Konoha. At least there are people here looking out for him. Kushina flinched and her cuffs clinked in the brief silence. If I know the big man, Naruto won't be happy forever as long as he's here. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Kabuto pushed his glasses up viciously, so that the light glared off of the lenses momentarily. Maybe you're right. But it certainly won't make you feel better if he isn't. He stood up. I'll leave you to your compositions. Kabuto frowned. Your form is sloppy. No it's not, Naruto said tightly. He stepped forward and threw a punch, then another. Kabuto dodged, and when Naruto's next punch went wide, Kabuto worked his way into Naruto's guard and knocked him down on his ass. He placed a foot on Naruto's chest, staring him down. Your form is sloppy, Naruto. You're not focusing. What's going on? Naruto didn't reply, didn't even struggle, just avoided Kabuto's eyes and braced his hands against the floor, levering himself up into a sitting position. After a minute, he mumbled under his breath. Excuse me. I asked how long it's been since I got here. You mean since you arrived at this facility? Naruto rolled his eyes. No, I meant since I was born, Kabuto. Of course since I arrived at the facility. A little under 2 years. Why? When do I get to go home? Kabuto hesitated. Naruto had hardly ever shown signs of wanting to return to Konoha. Kabuto had been led to believe that the boy's life there had, sad to say, been a many times more miserable affair than the one he was experiencing as an experiment. Do you want to go home? Naruto looked up, alarm in his eyes. Of course I do. How will I be Hokage if I don't take my genin exam in Konoha? Is that the only reason you want to return? Naruto didn't respond. Kabuto eventually sat down, watching Naruto watch the floor. Why do you want to be Hokage, anyway? He asked softly. Why did you become a shinobi? Naruto shot back. Well, Kabuto adjusted his glasses. He had never really talked like this before, talked about himself. I was found on a battlefield when I was very young. Right after the Battle of Kikyo Pass. You may not have heard of it. It took place near the end of the Third Great Shinobi War. In any case, I was found by the captain of the Konoha Medic Corps. He adopted me, but I think he had his misgivings about taking me in. For the longest time I barely spoke. Even when I had settled in, I didn't want to play with other children. I didn't even cry. The other medics said that it was post-traumatic stress disorder, but I knew it wasn't. I couldn't even remember what happened on the day they found me. I was too young. I just didn't see things the way the civilian children did. Everything was a potential danger that had to be accounted for and carefully worked around or counteracted. And that led you to become a shinobi? Naruto asked, frowning until his brow creased. I was always studying people, Naruto. Other children, adults, authority figures, people no one respected, everyone. I classified them, sorted them, and when the time came that I was asked which group I wanted to belong to, I decided to look up to the shinobi. Silent, efficient, respected, feared. I did make one concession, however. I was well aware of my own abilities, my gifts, my curses. I decided to become a medic shinobi, which not only put my father's mind at rest, but seemed the right path for me. I don't regret it. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you had chosen differently? No, a beat. Are you having second thoughts on becoming a shinobi, Naruto? Kabuto asked. No, I'm seeing this through, even if it takes another 2 years for me to become a genin. Kabuto gave a half smile. Titles mean practically nothing, Naruto. If you were a Jonin-level shinobi with nothing but a genin headband to your name, would you be overpowered by a chunin just because he had a vest and you didn't? No, I guess not. Naruto stood up and offered Kabuto a hand. It's still nice to have that recognition, though. True. Kabuto used Naruto's hand to help himself up. He looked down at the younger boy. Naruto was still obviously preoccupied. A tiny spark of regret bloomed somewhere inside of Kabuto. Do you want to learn a new jutsu? He asked abruptly. Naruto's head jerked up. Seriously? Oh, why not? Orochimaru looked on from the adjoining observation room. Kabuto had begun teaching the boy to shunshin. Orochimaru was slightly wary of teaching the boy a jutsu that could potentially lead to his escaping, but after what he had said about seeing the program through, Orochimaru wasn't unduly worried. It wasn't as if he could tell Kabuto off, as the silver-haired boy had requested a list of approved jutsu to teach to Naruto and Orochimaru had gotten one of his lab assistants to do it. Orochimaru had long since mastered the art of delegating. He had given the list a cursory glance before passing it on, and he was pretty sure that Shunshin had been on it. Orochimaru returned to his office, settling himself at his desk as usual and pushing away a stack of papers that was gradually breeding on the polished surface. He carefully set aside a glass jar, not sparing the hand and ring inside a second glance. He had work to do. In a little under 6 months, his current skin could be shed. Which meant stepping up the infusion process on behalf of the new one. Orochimaru ran through the checklist in his head: the paper witch, the puppet master, the leech. He considered his options. He knew he had limited time in which to distribute the remaining 6 samples, and some of them were better given sooner than later. He just hoped that some samples, like Hidan's or Itachi's or even Pain's, would give the boy exactly the same powers as those possessed by the donors. Another thing to take into account was the fact that some of the infusions would be regrettably obvious to the boy. Despite what he told his erstwhile lackey, Orochimaru actually did care whether or not the boy was aware of the process. The child of Kushina would most likely object if he discovered at the wrong time what was being done to him, and the last thing that Orochimaru needed was for his precious test subject to take his own life and thereby prevent his skin being dedicated to a higher purpose. Glancing one last time over the list of remaining infusions, Orochimaru reached a decision. Kabuto was profoundly glad that Naruto's room was sealed against his using jutsu inside. Now that Naruto could shunshin, it was much more difficult to keep up with him in spars, particularly when he would intersperse his shunshin with Kawarimi. Kabuto would turn, searching for Naruto after he had disappeared, and then have to hastily dodge a falling log. He hadn't been hit by one yet, but it was only a matter of time, and when that time came, Naruto would never let him live it down. Recently, Naruto had begun getting bored being cooped up in his room, sometimes for hours at a time. He had resorted to asking Kabuto if he could wander around the labs when Kabuto was elsewhere. Kabuto refused, instead offering to let Naruto watch an autopsy. Naruto warily accepted, reassured when Kabuto told him that he did not have to stay if he couldn't handle it. To which Naruto responded that any shinobi worth anything should not be squeamish at the sight of blood. Kabuto left it at that, choosing not to respond. Naruto stared at the body reposing on the brushed steel table. It was tastefully covered by a sheet, but Kabuto could tell that Naruto was taking in the dimensions and approximate build and making an age estimate. He nodded in approval, moving to pull the sheet back just far enough to show the woman's face. He heard Naruto give a sharp intake of breath and turned to see him. He was pale, although, to give him credit, he was approaching the table rather than backing away. How? He stopped. Cleared his throat. Who is she? Kabuto shrugged. Unknown. Her body was discovered yesterday. Autopsy is standard in determining whether it was homicide or not. Naruto looked confused and more than a little disturbed. You mean she wasn't killed by a shinobi or samurai? Kabuto glanced down, surprised. Naruto, civilians kill each other all the time. Just because they don't have training or authorization in certain cases like shinobi or samurai doesn't mean they can't be brutal. Trust me, I know that. Naruto swallowed once more. Just, why? Why did she die? No idea. I'm just here for the how. For all we know, it was natural causes. Or at least, probably not, because 35 to 45-year-old women like her don't usually drop dead for no reason, but until we take a look, it could be anything. Naruto nodded slowly, numbly. Kabuto took it as a sign that he was going to be all right. He went over to one of the sinks set against the wall to wash his hands before pulling on a pair of gloves. He extracted a pair of face masks from a box, turning to offer one to Naruto. Naruto did not hold out a hand to take it. He was scrutinizing Kabuto as intently as he had just been staring at the body. Kabuto lowered his hand. What is it? He asked. He was getting sick of asking that of late. He was not accustomed to caring for the well-being of those around him. If one of Orochimaru-sama's lab rats was whining about his job that day, it was put up or shut up. Kabuto was not expected to tolerate it, and he most certainly did not appreciate it when there was work to be done. Research was a tough job to get into, particularly for civilians, and those who worked under Orochimaru-sama were easily and often replaced. Naruto just frowned in response. It almost looked fierce, for a 12-year-old. Just thinking, he said slowly. Is this what you do when I'm not around you? Sometimes, yes, but less than you would expect, Kabuto conceded. It was mostly true. In fact, most of the bodies he examined were nothing like this one. He generally dealt with the corpses of Orochimaru-sama's failed experiments, not those of nameless homicide victims from Otogakure. Naruto nodded slowly, thinking it over. Kabuto pushed up his glasses, rolling his eyes. Do you not want to watch, Naruto? No, it's okay. I'll stay. Kabuto resisted the urge to roll his eyes once more and perhaps remark in a condescending tone, good boy. All right, let's get started then. Keep in mind, I will be grilling you on everything that you've learned. As expected. Kabuto cast him a glance. Was that a shot? Maybe Naruto would do better than he thought with this. Naruto wandered the library, idly running his finger along the spines at eye level, but really reading the titles from the shelf below. Kabuto was a couple of rows over, apparently looking for volumes of old notes made by distinguished researchers whose names Naruto didn't bother to remember. Naruto paused at a couple of books, twisting his head to read the titles. After a moment, he poked his head out of the end of the row he was in, checking right and left, then he went back. After pulling out one of the books he had been looking at, he went to find Kabuto. The books and scrolls here did not seem to be organized in any conventional way, but rather in the sorts of grouping that might have been designed for the sake of easy convenience to be navigable by only the one who knew what and where every book was already. Naruto found Kabuto at last, crouched before a shelf with a couple of smaller scrolls and one or two more substantial tomes stacked before him. He was leaning over a book open to near the end, probably browsing the index, Naruto thought. Hey Kabuto? Naruto asked. Kabuto looked up. Yes, Naruto? So I was researching blood rituals, really? Are you still hung up on the autopsy? Naruto made a face. I was kidding. Anyway, I found this book and wondered if you could tell me about it before I read it. Too lazy to read the preface. Kabuto, you are literally the only person I have ever met who reads the preface to every book. Therefore, you should understand when I say that authors never write anything important in the preface. That is not true. Nothing interesting, at least. Well, Kabuto, don't you dare come up with a counterexample on the spot. Just tell me what this book is about. Kabuto held out a hand and took the book, flipping it over to check the front cover. Jashinism? That's pretty grim reading. Are you sure? It sounds pretty interesting to me, Naruto said defensively. All right, if you're sure. This particular book is one written by a Jashinist, actually, so it will be full of recounts of gory bloodbaths and religious ranting and heretical-sounding declarations of faith. If you're going to read it, I'd suggest reading an outsider's point of view first to brace yourself and get a clearer picture of all of the rituals and images he refers to. Jashinists are immortal, you see, so while the author of this book is technically still alive, you may need a syllabus for some of the more arcane or outdated references. Okay, thanks. Naruto made to head back, but turned when he caught something. What? Did you say something? No problem. Oh. Okay. That night when Kabuto entered the observation room adjoining Naruto's, it was to come face to face with his employer. Shall we? Orochimaru said sweetly, gesturing for Kabuto to precede him out of the room. Kabuto complied and the two were soon ensconced in a lab, looking at each other over Naruto's supine body. This is romantic, Kabuto thought sarcastically. Why must he always spring these little sessions on me? Would stripping away his little air of enigma for 5 seconds really kill him, or does his well-being actually depend on being such a prima donna? And then, it's a damn good thing he can't read minds. Which one will it be this time, Orochimaru-sama? Kabuto asked, the very picture of subservient obedience. I'd like to state for the record that Naruto has begun researching Jashinism with no prompting whatsoever from me. Interesting, Orochimaru said, and more than likely beneficial. However, it is not the Jashinist's blood that I wish to give to the boy today. Orochimaru withdrew a vial from his pocket, fussily checking the seal and smoothing and rereading the label before handing it over. Kabuto took the vial, giving it only the cursory glance that it took to recognize the contents. By this time, Kabuto had studied every sample to the point where more than this was not necessary. Kakuzu, was all he said. Correct. Orochimaru paused. After a minute or so, Kabuto glanced up at him. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. I am waiting for you to make your usual objections or to attempt to dissuade me from taking this course of action. Kabuto stared blankly for a moment. Then his eyes widened slightly as he understood. No, Orochimaru-sama. I would never presume to question your judgment. And yet you have done so with alarming frequency ever since I put you on this project, Orochimaru murmured. Don't apologize, Kabuto. I value your input in general. I was simply taken aback that you have nothing to offer on this occasion. Kabuto simmered. Nothing to offer? If Orochimaru-sama thought that was the case, he could very well pull Kabuto from this ridiculous babysitting job. Kabuto would get to stop using his medical jutsu to prevent carpal tunnel from all of the notes he was taking and could get down to some real work. He shook himself a little. Listen to him. It wouldn't do for him to suspect you of having less than loyal thoughts. Orochimaru was still speaking. Well, if you have no questions or reservations, I can't pretend it doesn't make a nice change. You can at least pretend, Kabuto thought bitterly. I'll leave you to get on with it, Orochimaru said with a smile. He left. Kabuto resisted the urge to break something, not knowing if he was being monitored or not. By this point it was a matter of routine to get Naruto's unconscious form situated and primed. Kabuto injected the boy with the infusion. He sat down. He waited for something to happen. After half an hour or so, Kabuto could sense, like a petrel before the storm, the incoming boredom this day would bring were he not equipped to combat it. To that end, he retrieved a stack of file folders and scrolls, all containing information on Kakuzu of Tokigakure. He skimmed the paragraphs. They ranged from accounts of those who had witnessed Kakuzu in action to those who had known him before he went rogue. Mostly these were official reports, however, which was another way of saying that they were virtually devoid of useful information. It was only when he reached the bit that Orochimaru-sama himself had written during his brief stint as a member of Akatsuki that Kabuto felt an inexplicable sinking feeling. He glanced up at Naruto, who had been twitching for the last 15 minutes or so, occasional spasms causing him to strain against the restraints. Nothing out of the ordinary. So why did Kabuto get the feeling that he might have just thrown a wrench into the proceedings with this particular infusion? Calm down. You always feel like this. A human body is not designed to take all of the strain you put on his. He has borne up well under the pressure so far, why should this be different? Stay calm. Analyze. Out of habit, Kabuto grabbed a copy of his original predictions. Glancing from them to Naruto, he opened the folder. He did not even have to flick to the section he wanted before he remembered. Damn and blast it. He thought. Orochimaru-sama may legitimately kill me this time. Kill me and feed me to some sort of hideous fledgling monster. Shakily, Kabuto ran a hand through his hair before automatically pushing up his glasses. He washed and dried his hands, pulling on gloves and a face mask. He was moving in a strange hyperware trance. He kept trying to think about what to do, but nothing was occurring to him. His mind was just a whirling, whining space full of think. He was standing over Naruto, the greenish haze already visible around his hand before he realized that he would not be able to use the chakra scalpels, after all. Naruto's scales would prevent all contact. So Kabuto reached for a blade of steel instead, his anxiety increasing rapidly. It had been a long time since he had actually used a mundane scalpel. It wasn't too different from his chakra scalpels, but there was less control of the blade and right now even that felt really unsettling. Kabuto carefully cut into Naruto's flesh, making a Y cut from collarbones to sternum and from sternum to diaphragm as he had when he had been dissecting that woman down in the autopsy lab. Kabuto suppressed a shudder. Not that he was adverse to vivisection necessarily, it was essentially akin to surgery, after all. It was just so strange because of how well he knew Naruto by now. Kabuto set down the scalpel, pulling back one of the flaps he had created, immediately worried when no blood was forthcoming. No blood. Kabuto hissed at the sight that met him. Under Naruto's skin bunched a network of thick, coarse threads. There were no nerves or veins. No muscles. Naruto's skeleton was virtually unchanged and, after a little poking around, Kabuto found a full set of internal organs, but the fact remained that Naruto's mobility and livelihood was now entirely run on chakra. As Naruto twitched, Kabuto watched certain bundles of the threads bunch and stretch like muscles. He noticed that other threads, perhaps taking the places of veins, were firmly rooted into Naruto's organs, particularly his heart, which still beat, although with what, Kabuto did not know. No blood. Kabuto fitted the flaps back together, not even bothering to thread a needle for stitches, knowing that the cuts would be healed presently. He collapsed into a chair, stripping off the gloves and mask and tossing them into the sink. How on earth will he be able to use Hidan's abilities when the time comes if he has no blood with which to draw the ritual circle? Kabuto put his hands to his face, pushing his glasses up onto his head in order to rub his eyes. Surely I cannot be blamed for this. The results of these experiments have always been unpredictable. Perhaps this will not be too bad. I just have to make sure not to present this in a bad light. Perhaps the combination of this ability and Hidan's will be more favorable than it seems now. Kabuto sat for a while, calming down. Finally, his frayed attention span turned wearily to the new abilities themselves. I wonder if Naruto can do what Kakuzu can do. Can he absorb hearts? I cannot try it though. What if he notices that he has 2 heartbeats? The results would be quite distressing. Kabuto stood and began to pace. When we spar in the future, not only must I be sure that I do not perform jutsu on him, I must also be sure not to cut his skin. If his chakra reserves weren't so grotesquely enormous and had he not the Kyuubi in him, he might not have had enough chakra to sustain himself at this point. However, as things stand, simply moving around will most likely work as an exercise to increase his reserves even further. Perhaps this, in addition to Kakuzu's immortality technique, will be enough to placate Orochimaru-sama. Seriously, this whole Kakuzu's power impeding Hidan's smacks of something that would actually be orchestrated by those two. Not that I think they planned this or even were aware of this little experiment. I'm not that paranoid. On the table, Naruto thrashed, the wounds nearly healed but his sleeping mind a whirl of disturbing images. Naruto felt an unpleasant tugging sensation in his chest. He raised his head. He was lying on an operating table. Kabuto was standing over him, that deadly green haze surrounding his hand. There was blood splattered across it as Kabuto raised it out of the way. Naruto looked down at his own chest. He tried to scream, but he had no lungs. There were snakes, long and sinuous, sliding out of the hole Kabuto had cut in him. He looked up at the older boy, planning to ask why he would do it, but he couldn't breathe, couldn't make a sound. Then he saw the threads, connecting to Kabuto's hands and head, forcing the scalpel down toward Naruto while Kabuto's lifeless glass eyes stared eerily. Naruto craned his head, trying to see who was pulling the strings, but the man was in Kabuto's shadow. Naruto felt something sharp prick his cheek. He turned his head and met a pair of slit-pupiled orange eyes and the madman's scribble of a snarl. The dream popped like a soap bubble and Naruto sat up, shaking and panting. For a minute he could still remember the dream, but when he did not rush to write down the details, they faded and he was left cold and disturbed but none the wiser. He smoothed his hands down his chest momentarily, puzzled by the lingering feelings of constriction. He was back in his bedroom, the mirrored glass on one side and the desk bearing his notes on the other. When Kabuto eventually came in, he found Naruto slumped at his desk, idly doodling battle puppets bristling with fanciful weapons and sporting the faces of people he knew. Was all Orochimaru said. Kabuto knelt before him, the back of his neck prickling with sweat and a finger rammed across his nose to hold up his glasses. No blood, you say? And his organs are being run entirely on chakra? Yes, Orochimaru-sama. And you find this a concern because you do not think that I will not have blood to spill for the sake of a Jushinist ritual? Kabuto hesitated. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, he said finally. Even though one's body changes to reflect one's opponent's body when in the cursed state. Kabuto frowned for a moment. I did not know that, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru rolled his eyes. This hardly seems to be a cause for concern, Kabuto. One way or another I will be immortal, rest assured. I have no doubt, Orochimaru-sama. Then act like it. This is my plan and it will not fail, he snapped. Of course, Orochimaru-sama. Then, if you have no more objections, you are dismissed. Ka-sensei? Naruto fiddled with the paper before him. Kushina smiled. Yes, Naruto. Where do you come from? Kushina gave Naruto a long look, frantically reviewing Kabuto's original instructions in her head. It's a pretty boring story, she said slowly. Are you sure you want to hear it? Naruto shook his head impatiently. That's what adults say when they don't want to tell me something, he said. I bet it's a good story. Well, will you tell it to me? Kushina glanced at the tinted window, impassive as ever. She thought quickly. As long as she did not mention Konoha or the Kyuubi, she would technically not be disobeying Kabuto's instructions. She took a careful breath. If it's a story you want, she muttered. I was born in Uzushiogakure. Naruto looked faintly puzzled. Whirlpool? I've never even heard of it. You wouldn't have, Kushina said, each word rolling off her tongue and falling with a great heaviness into the stark quiet of the room. It was destroyed some time before you were born. The end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.